Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. I stared with confusion at my phone. The rest of the gang were all in on this Monopoly game. I swear to God, if you get free parking, I will literally kill your stupid face, said Evelyn. Ravi rolled the dice in his hands. Come on, sweet baby Jesus. I just need a 4. He dropped them onto the board. Fuck, he said, probably biffing it like always. I tried to make sense of it. Just a word on my screen, black text on an all-white background, a rather classical-looking font. Hide. I tapped rather impatiently on the expensive black rectangle. The text wouldn't disappear. A J, Evelyn called, like a teacher busting a student. You're fucking addicted. Play board games like a normal human adult. Yeah, sorry. A few more desperate finger pecks at the screen, then I turned to holding the power button down for an extended period. With my free hand, I grabbed the dice, rolled a 3, landed on B&O Railroad. After 2 seconds of thought, nah, fuck railroads, I said. Of course, we weren't animals. If someone didn't want to buy a property, that was fine. No auctions or any of that nonsense. House rules. Back to the phone as Hero, on my left, took the cubes and prepared to drag his sorry little shoe across Go to collect his $200. A minute with the power button didn't do anything. We were entering factory reset territory. I contemplated borrowing Ravi's laptop to Google whatever the fuck this might have been. I felt the apartment rumble, albeit just for a split second, as if we were on the edge of an earthquake. I tensed briefly. The background noise from the TV. No One Wants This auto-playing on Netflix disappeared following the faint sound of the flicker of static. Ravi was the first to get up. He said, talking slowly as if not to jinx it. I don't think that was an earthquake. He examined the TV, confused at the outage. He checked the wires. Shouldn't be the breaker. I don't have that much stuff plugged in, do I? I grappled with the sad, likely hacked state of my phone, and that weird word staring me down. Damn, that's fucking weird, I heard Hero say, half laughing. Head lifted. What? I asked to catch Hero turning his phone to me. His home screen, too, had been replaced by black text atop white. Hide. Evelyn, as anti-technology as it comes, had properly clocked this reprieve as her time to quickly respond to long outstanding texts. The fuck? She said. What is this? At my confused look, bordering on scowl, resting scowl face, she flipped her phone around to show me the damage. It was the same on hers. I grew a bit nervous. Ravi, where's your phone? I asked him. I'm sure it's somewhere, he said, still tinkering with the TV. Likely not due to any of his troubleshooting, it flashed back to life, red power light at the base blinking steadily. A simple message now appeared on the big screen. Hide? Ravi asked, grabbing the remote and pressing buttons to switch back to Netflix, but nothing was registering. Dude, I said. He turned around. I showed him my phone. Hero and Evelyn showed theirs. He looked back at the TV, then at us again. Wait, how is that possible? Is that like an Amber Alert? Hero asked. I mean, I guess, but that's a push notification. This is like completely overtaking the screen. Ravi's brows furrowed. On different hardware, too. A hack? I asked. He shrugged. That's kind of a weird hack, no? Government experiment? Hero again. A thought came over me. I walked to the balcony, slid the door open, stepped out onto it. Eye of Sauron, the city from Ravi's 14th floor apartment. In the neighboring apartment towers, most of the units had blinds down, curtains closed. The few unshuttered, however, I felt like that guy from Rear Window, contained strangers staring perplexed at their phones, at their computers. The sides of bolted-to-the-wall TVs, barely visible to me, displayed the same white background with text atop it. What I was seeing, everyone else was seeing. The others joined me on the balcony. Whatever it is, it's at least hit this block, I said. I looked down at the city streets, most of the people below caught in a similar holding pattern of standing frozen, heads fixed to their devices. I guess we don't have anything to call the cops with. Hero, I'm sure they're aware. Mister, maybe wait it out until they fix it? Ravi, I nodded, and yet I could tell Evelyn was a bit perturbed, forcing magnetic thoughts to imbue her silence with weight. Thoughts? I asked her. I mean, should we do it? She asked. Do what? Ravi. Hide. Her again. Hide where? Ravi again. I don't know, she said. I mean, we're already in my apartment. I'm sure that's good enough, right? He said. A pause. Let's not lose our heads, Ravi continued. This is nuts, but it's not. I mean, it's not like literally hide, right? Hero clicked his fingers. What if it's viral marketing, like for a movie? Hero with the necessary but unintentional levity. Hacking our phones so we can't use them? I don't know if that's in Lionsgate's purview, man, I said, then head turned to Evelyn. But hide? The flicker in her eyes more than meant that she'd sided with the light bulb in her head. She returned to the inside and got to exploring Ravi's apartment carefully. What are you doing? Ravi asked, trailing. Hero and I followed. I don't care if I look stupid. It could be a warning. Maybe something is happening, she said. We're in a box, basically, said Ravi. We're fine, Ev. But the fucking thing, she motioned to the TV, then to her own phone, says hide. Maybe it's that literal. She continued scouting, finally settling on the sliding closet in Ravi's room, the best she could come up with in his 600-square-foot quarters. I'll do here unless you think there's better. Evelyn, Ravi stressed. She shuffled in, past hung garments, scooching to the end to make space. I'm gonna close the door soon, and if you're all really my friends, you'll join me. Awkward silence until Hero chimed first. I mean, guess it's good to be safe, right? He went for it, second-guessed for a second, then committed to entering. You guys get the luxury of laughing at me forever if I'm dumb. Win-win, she called while Hero wedged in beside her. A compelling argument, certainly. Begrudgingly, I followed, tucking in next under Ravi's dress clothes. There was still room for him inside his own closet. Fucking hell, he caved, joining last, sliding the door closed to introduce darkness. I went back to my phone. Still that classical font, still that mandate. How long do we have to stay in here? Ravi asked. 5 minutes, she said. Yeesh, he tagged. And then we sat in stillness for a while. Distant tick-tick-ticks of the clock in the living room bringing down the blood pressure a tad. It all felt silly, kind of fun. Remember when we went camping at Sunlight Groves? Hero asked. Glamping, Ravi clarified. Ev thought she saw a bear. Hero laughed. A bear and its cub. It was dark, it fucking looked like bears, she said, half laughing herself. I heard noises too. Bears at Sunlight Groves, he said again. Saddest patch of trees in America. Guys, shut up. We're here, so let's commit to the bit. Before the conjuring doll gets us, said Ravi, surprisingly not bitterly. We kept our traps zipped for another minute. Eyes at my phone again. Hide. Nonsensical, all of it really, but in a way that was starting to sit more and more uncomfortably for me. What do you think it is? Hero whispered. I shook my head. Evelyn with the light shrug. Ravi with a deep inhale before speaking. I mean, obviously sophisticated, he said, voice low. Like it's obviously something. I waved my phone. My bank is on this and it's bricked now, basically. I'm fucked. They'll figure something out, said Ravi. Powerful knocks at his apartment door all of a sudden, thundering. Hey, a voice called, muffled through the walls. Ravi, you there? Evelyn braced. Who is that? A skinwalker, obviously, replied Ravi. Kidding, my neighbor Monica. Evelyn reached across me and Hero to tug at Ravi's sleeve. Are you positive? Yes, and I should probably get it. You said 5 minutes, she said. Yeah, but I'm being a pretty trash neighbor right now, he replied. The knocking persisted. So did the words. I have this weird thing on my phone, Brad has it too. It says hide, TV same thing, computer same thing, I don't know how to reach anyone or what to do. The neighbor trailed on. Ravi blew air out of his nose. All right, this is stupid, I'm gonna... No, said Evelyn. But then all of a sudden... He stopped. We all stopped. I felt something. Something very, very real, no knocking anymore. Or at least I couldn't hear anything. Not the tick of the clock, nor the soft rustle of us against clothing. It was like the world was holding its breath, like there was a presence. Right outside the closet. Then, the sting of static in my ear before. It passed. Whatever it was, the feeling dissipated, the sound returned, and I sneaked a glance at my phone. The word hide was gone, and replacing it was my home screen. The silence between the four of us was uncomfortable. Did you feel that? Evelyn finally whispered. No one said anything. Ravi outstretched his arm yet again to slide the door open, but his hands were shaking. "You can do it," I whispered. "I think we're good." He steeled himself, looking very much like he was crossing some sort of internal threshold. He pulled the door aside, revealing his room exactly as we'd left it. We took it in. "I'm gonna answer Monica," he said with not a whole lot of vigor to his voice, getting up and creeping out of the room. The rest of us followed, stopping in the living room while he continued to the door. I went to Twitter, searched hide, and sorted by new. Evelyn, meanwhile, grabbed the remote from the stand and turned the TV, now hideless, on and maneuvered through the Roku channels. "What are you looking for?" Hero asked. "Just like a live channel, I guess," she replied. "The news?" My scrolling wasn't yielding anything of help or insight, though it was clear, via the confused posts from seemingly around the whole world, that the scope of whatever happened was global. My focus shifted to Ravi, who was standing on the welcome mat, eye pressed against the door's peephole. He hadn't moved in quite some time. "Everything all right, man?" I asked. He didn't reply, just stood there frozen. I approached slowly. She's... I heard him croak. I reached him, patting him on the shoulders and urging him to detach from the door viewer. He finally did, leaning against the wall at first before slowly sliding to a seat on the floor. I peered into the hallway through the hole. Outside, his neighbor, the one knocking, looked like she'd been skewered, decimated, an explosion of blood in the hallway. "What?" I felt a buzz on my phone. I pulled it out. Again, before I could even process, I heard Ravi and Evelyn react. "There's another one. It says again now." I turned to see the foreboding word on the TV. "Fuck. So we should hide again," Hero called. Much like Ravi, I was shell-shocked. "AJ, what do you think we should do?" he repeated. "Evelyn," I said, trying to force the words out of my mouth. "You had good instincts the first time. What do you think?" "How much time do you think we have?" she asked. How much time passed between when I first saw the word hide and when we felt that presence in the closet? "It might have been 10 minutes, I heard Ravi mutter, almost lifeless. "I don't..." Then Evelyn interrupted herself. "Wait, what did you just see outside?" She started approaching the door. I stopped her. "I don't think it'll be good for you to see it." Are you serious?" she responded. "Yes," I said, immediately realizing that lying might have been smarter. "We can't assume we have the same amount of time," Ravi added. I went with my pitch. "Do we try the same spot?" Hero started pacing, thinking, tapping his foot. If we think about it, it said hide and we hid. Now it's saying again, and obviously that means that whatever happened is gonna happen again. He gave us a look, as if he could see, in our drained expressions, what was waiting on the other side of the door. "That's a great recap, man," I said. "What I mean," he said, struggling, "is that when you'd play as a kid, if you kept picking the same spot over and over, eventually it'd catch up to you." "Are we really trying to apply some sort of logic to this?" Ravi mumbled. Evelyn fortified herself. "I think he's right, it's nuts, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but we need to operate on gut. And gut tells me, we pick better spots this time." "But spots makes it sound like we should split up," I said, looking around, slowly realizing that the limited real estate we had to work with meant this suggestion made more sense than I would have liked. I turned to Ravi. "Where should we all go?" He shook his head, palmed his forehead a few times as if to slap himself back to reality. "We do," he started, thinking. "Two under my bed," he grimaced, letting neurons collide in his mind. "One of us in the utility closet, the other, laundry closet." He got up and pointed. One of the closets was right behind me. Life in him again. "Now." My eyes flitted to Hero and Evelyn, who ran into the bedroom. Ravi gave me a nod before entering the laundry closet and awkwardly squeezing in with the washer and dryer closing his door. I entered the utility closet and closed mine. Rather, I tried to. The door wasn't clicking shut. "Fuck," I said. "Ravi, the door, it's not..." But then I fought the urge to say anything more. If time was up, I'd compromise my spot. Hell, compromise his spot too if I kept talking. I tried a few more times to get it to close, then I committed, terrified out of my mind, to gripping the handle and holding the door shut. I tried to keep my shaking hand and quickening breath in check as the silence overtook again. Complete silence, and then that presence. I felt a light tug at the door. I kept my hold firm but didn't try to overpower. Didn't want to completely give it away. And again it stopped. The feeling disappeared. and I waited 15 seconds before sneaking a look at my phone to see that the again warning was gone. I heard the sound of Ravi's door swing open first. I followed with mine. He was emotional. I forgot that door is fucked. I got scared, man, and I was, "You're all good." "It's all right, man, I know." "I even heard you call for me, and I didn't." I panicked, and I thought it'd, "We're alive, man, it's all right, we're..." And immediately I remembered it wasn't just us. Evelyn and Hero. "Right," he said. We rushed to his bedroom. Nothing at first. The two hadn't emerged yet. For a moment, the horrifying thought that we'd be pulling their corpses out from under the bed rushed past me. "Guys," I said, "coast is clear." Quick. Silence. For quite some time, before they finally shuffled out in one piece, alive. As they shifted from crawl to bend to standing, I wanted to hold them. Hold everyone. For just a second, I felt a newfound appreciation for life and their faces and personalities. Another buzz on my phone. I took a look. Break time. I let out a sigh of relief and showed the message to the others. "I guess that's good," Evelyn said. A second to catch our breaths after this fucking craziness. "But then what?" Ravi asked. "Is this just gonna continue?" We walked into the living room together nervously. "We haven't even gotten a single second to wrap our heads around this." Evelyn again. Something in me didn't seem right. I didn't feel good. "Hey, Ev, how'd you know that we should have stayed in the closet for 5 minutes?" Hero asked, somewhat pointedly. I clocked minor annoyance in her face at the question. "I didn't know anything. It was a guess. But I mean, yeah. You guys were fucking lucky I was here and pushed for it, because fuck were you all being stubborn." Hero wore a strange expression as he looked at her. "All right. Sounds like you want to say something more," she said. "Why would I? What makes you think I'd..." Ravi interrupted Hero by stepping between the two of them. "Holy hell, keep your heads on people." But as he said it, and maybe it was just an aberration in my mind, but I couldn't help but feel something significant stir within me. Something really inflame. As if even though his face was straight, he was concealing some sort of inner smile at what was happening. "Hero, I think you're focusing your skepticism in the wrong direction," I said. Ravi's expression turned irritated, which all but confirmed it for me. "I don't know if you want to be mad at the person that saved us the first time," I said, trying to make a point by motioning to Evelyn, but as I looked at her, something felt wrong there too. I contained it. Or rather, the person who wanted to open the closet door. And then something even more obvious hit me. "Wait, Ravi, you tried to kill me." And all of a sudden I was glaring at him, my temper rising by metric tons every second as if it was all starting to make sense. Evelyn and Hero joined me. Ravi looked incredulous. "I already admitted that I fucked up with the door. I confess to you. Why are you trying to make things worse? I was trying to calm them down." Then, noticing us approach him, he backed towards the kitchen cabinets. He pointed at me. "You were on your phone when this first happened," he said, as if he were having his own revelation. "You were waiting for it to start." "That's an insane fucking misdirect," I said, positive that I couldn't trust him. But as my eyes turned to Evelyn and Hero, I realized I couldn't trust them either. Couldn't trust anyone. Still, Ravi absolutely needed to be the first to go. The first to be disposed of. He grabbed a knife from the cupboard and held it out at us. And only the smallest thought in the back of my mind was telling me that we were being toyed with, that it was so incredibly obvious that whatever this was, it had a handle on us. But unfortunately, that understanding was academic for me at best, as I kept finding string after string of thoughts and emotions connecting, everything adding up, the logic sound, my emotions inflamed. "Break time," Evelyn said. "It's breaking us." Of course she would know that, though, if she were in on it. We all looked at her. I watched for sudden movements from any of these traitors, these bastards. Even a millimeter shift wouldn't get past me. "It's overriding us, it's flooding us with anger that isn't ours, and real as it feels." She faced her phone at us, beckoning us to read it clearly. "Break time. We can't fall to it." And that small grounded part of me took over. Even though I was sure with everything in my soul that she, Ravi, and Hero were the source of everything that was happening. Ravi's grip on the knife tightened as he and the rest of us remained in the bizarre equilibrium of our four-way standoff. "It's all of you," I thought to myself, before I felt a lightness overtake me, like an insatiable hunger fading, or extreme fear dissipating when you realize that noise in the other room wasn't a person but rather something knocking over. My feelings of unrest and paranoia were gone. My phone screen once again, returned to its default background. It was hard to describe how I felt now. Lucidity. Shame. I looked at Ravi sadly. His head hung low as he put the knife back in its place. Hero turned to Evelyn first. "I'm sorry," he said. Then to Ravi. "Sorry. Sorry, guys." Ravi. "I'm sorry." "Mister, you're welcome, assholes." Evelyn. "We deserve that." "That was fucking insane," Ravi said. "Like a fucked up roller coaster ride," said Evelyn. "I didn't, that wasn't totally me," Hero said. "Like, something was in me and it's okay, man." I was getting tired of saying it, and certainly I, out of everyone, didn't deserve to impart forgiveness anyway after where my own head was at only 30 seconds ago. "We need to, write something down, like we are susceptible. Don't forget," started Ravi. "We just need to remember to keep your heads on," I interrupted. "Remember." But I think the fear that again would pop up on our phones drove him to start rummaging for some paper, start scribbling some words on it, while the rest of us tried to soak in the reprieve of nothing happening. Every half second a luxury. I wanted to say sorry another 20 or so times, something I was sure wasn't a feeling unique to me. "I feel like I'm losing myself," I said. It felt like I was in a dream at this point. "Yeah," said Ravi. "Yeah. We're," Hero said, looking at us carefully. "Probably all gonna die. Should we, say our words, I guess?" Don't talk like that," said Evelyn. "How many people do you think are dead?" Hero asked. I went to the TV, temporarily free yet again from 1 or 2 word mandates, turned it on, toggled through the homepage until I found the live stream of a soccer game. One fixed camera angle. Everyone in the stadium, torn apart. Players on the field within frame, eviscerated. I returned to the homepage, navigating in an attempt to find a different live program. I clicked on what appeared to be a news channel I hadn't heard of before. The sight of an empty desk appeared. Wires leading under the desk made me think that perhaps the anchor was hiding under it. "We are trying to report," he said, "knowing that the signal is going to cut out. I've survived so far, survived whatever exactly this might be, but the carnage from footage I've seen is extensive. I strongly recommend..." The broadcast was interrupted by the new word, "seek," again in classical lettering, and the screen cracked, then shattered with a loud pop, sending bits of glass onto the floor. As did the screen on my phone that I'd placed on the coffee table. As did the phones in Evelyn and Hero's hands too, reactively dropped on the floor by the pair. A weak bounce before settling. I panicked. "Seek, seek," I said desperately, trying to jolt my brain to the task. "Maybe something out of place," Evelyn said. "What if we have to find what's killing everyone?" said Hero. I started, but I couldn't even muster up a close to the sentence. I ran to the balcony outside to see if there was something obvious to look for. In the sky, in the city. What I spotted on the neighboring high-rises was blood-stained curtains, unrecognizable bodies where blinds were lifted, and as my eyes darted from spot to spot, a lead. A small TV in one of the apartments. The screen looked unbroken. A word on it I couldn't make out. 5 letters was the best I could do. "It's the screens," I said. "We need to find a screen that still works." I ran back into the living room. "Does anyone have binoculars?" They all looked at me. "Why the fuck would anyone have binoculars?" Ravi asked. There's a screen, I think, in one of the other apartment buildings. It's working. There's a word, but I can't see it. We need to find another one. I don't know. I ran into Ravi's office. Computer screen broken. Fuck. Grabbed his laptop. Shattered. Nope. I nervously tapped my chest with the fingertips of both of my hands while the rest desperately searched for something viable too. Did I have to run to the other apartment? Would there even be enough time? How would I even get in? And then, like a bolt of the blue, it hit me. "Ravi, where's your phone?" His voice was a little confused. "I don't know, man. I lose it all the time." "Find it." "You really think that's it?" "We're looking for a functioning screen. It's the only one we haven't ruled out yet." I turned to Hero next. "Check out the other apartments on this floor. See if any of the doors are unlocked. If they are, go inside, check everything. Phones, laptops, TVs, doesn't matter. See if there's a message intact on any of them." "On it," he said, rushing to the door, opening it, freaking out at the body in front of it, nearly tripping, then composing himself and rushing into the hallway as the door closed behind him. We tore apart Ravi's apartment next. Couch cushions. "Where do you usually lose it?" I asked. My head peeked under the bed. Peeked into counters alongside Evelyn desperately. "I don't, man," he answered. It's stupid, but sometimes I literally just chuck it across the room. Helpful, supremely helpful. In the bathroom, I looked in the medicine cabinet. Then, back into his room, to his closet, checking the pockets of all of his pants. I started to feel the inevitable looming. This was the one that was going to kill us, wasn't it? Love you guys, I heard Evelyn say almost under her breath, like she could feel it too. No tangible ticker counting down, but a feeling in my chest. A train closing in with us tied to the tracks. Ravi running to the TV stand, looking behind, then under books under shelves. And I was back in the living room again, sure there was nothing left. My eyes lowering to the painful game we'd started our deadly evening with, Monopoly, specifically to the messy pile of 50s, 20s, and 10s on Ravi's side of the board. I knew his etiquette for swapping some of them out for hundreds was quite poor. The cash stacked high, which made sense. He was crushing all game. And yet, I crouched and did an even more aggressive sweep of the spot that we'd started our desperate search at, to discover his preserved Samsung Galaxy A35 underneath the fake money, with a new word to greet me. Smile. And it really did feel like time was up this time. I found it, you have Tasmile, I screamed like a goddamn auctioneer. Evelyn turned first from her spot in the kitchen. What? I ripped the phone from the ground and held up the message to her. Smile. She mirrored my uncomfortable expression. All teeth, feigned happiness, as did Ravi as he bolted out of the room before even seeing the message on the phone or my intense eyes. Hero threw open the door. Couldn't find anything, I'm sorry, he screamed. He saw our wide smiling faces and our eyes screaming at him to get the hint as I tried to mouth the word while keeping my pose, but instead it sounded like smuh. And yet, despite the confusing sight, with the luckiest stroke in the world, he copied and showed me those pearly whites. I retained my beaming smile, feeling a tear of fear travel down my cheek, my eyes glued to Ravi's phone in my hand, hoping and praying that we wouldn't all get torn apart. And the word disappeared. I showed the group the proof, and one by one our cheery expressions dropped to our default nervous frowns. Resting scowl face restored. A collective exhale. I can't fucking do this, said Ravi. I know, Evelyn added. And unlike some of the gaps we'd been afforded in the past, I already spotted a new message on the single remaining functional phone left in my right hand. Point to sacrifice. I could feel the group's eyes on me. I couldn't hide the misery. What? Ravi asked. Point to sacrifice, I said, barely legible. A J? Evelyn asked. I tilted the phone so they could read it. I couldn't say the words any louder. My body wouldn't let me. Underneath the words, a timer had been running, one that was already down to 145, 144, 143 by the time I flashed them the phone. And yet still all of us needed more seconds to let it settle. I felt defeated, truly this time. All right, said Ravi, cutting through the holding pattern. So what? We talk it through with the time we have left? Maybe we all agree on someone to point at. I mean, hey, fuck knows what I have to live for. Hero next. My family, mom, dad, siblings, I wasn't even thinking of them this whole time. They're all probably dead, Yeah, I interrupted, his words hitting me immediately and curbing any remaining social etiquette I had left. Everyone I had ever known was likely gone. Wow. Evelyn smiled at us softly. I just have you guys now, she said. So, yeah, fuck this, she said, immediately pointing to herself, almost causing me to die right there in fear she'd be torn apart immediately. But the counter was still ticking down. I flipped the board on this bullshit, she said without wavering. 1 to 12, 1 to 11, 1 to 10, Hero pointed to himself. Fuck it, yeah, you know what? I flipped the board too, he said. I looked at him almost nervously, exasperated. Really, after all that, guys? 107, 106, 105, if there is a hell, Ravi said. Unlikely, but what the fuck? Maybe we dodged that bullet. He curled his index finger back towards himself. Flip the fucking board. I just looked at them. It was strange to feel a deluge of selfish thoughts flood into me all at once. 040, 039, 038. All right, I said, copying my peers. Let's do it. I pointed at myself too, like we were all playing Simon Says or something. 033, 032, 031. I took an appreciative look at my old friends, the longest-standing friends I'd ever had in my stupid life. And then, at the Monopoly board we were playing on, it really was quite an awful game. I wasn't sure why we'd always subject ourselves to it. 027, 026, I saw the pile of money on free parking. 023, 022. The only way to make it fun was to play with bullshit rules, house rules. 020, 019. Wait, I said, follow me. I sprinted to the door. I opened it, held it open for the rest. 015, 014, 013. I pointed at Ravi's dead neighbor in the hallway in front of the door. Monica. We didn't know what we were dealing with until she died. Her sacrifice gave us a chance, I said, almost looking up as if I was speaking to whoever was enacting this terror on us. I was aware it was a reach. 009008. And we've probably lost a lot of humanity since then, so, sorry, I said, pointing at her. And thank you. 006005, and my best friends pointed too. A real morbid way to close things out with a clash of sorry and thank you escaping them as what would likely be their last words. I had really interrupted what was quite a nice moment inside for this strangeness. 00200100 house rules, I said. And then I prepared myself for it. Pain, then annihilation. But nothing came. Instead, Ravi's phone in my hand just read, "Good game." Before defaulting to Ravi's homepage picture, a borzoi. He didn't even own one, he was just obsessed with that breed of dog. We stood there for 10 minutes, it felt, before we finally ventured inside, single file, like a group of polite zombies. I was unsure what to make of what had happened, what to do, who to check on, the state of the world, what was going on around me. I sat back down at the Monopoly board. The others, in an almost Manchurian candidate sort of way, took their spots too. I think it was my turn, I said slowly. I grabbed the dice. I rolled. It was a 10. I tapped my top hat icon on each square until I landed on Short Line Railroad. "Do you want to buy it?" Evelyn asked me. I thought about it for too long. Finally, "Sure." When the monster came tapping on my window, a sickening, familiar panic began to drip down the back of my throat. It settled in my empty stomach and lit every one of my nerves on fire. I was foolish to believe that my nightmare was over, but I have to wake up eventually, right? I had hoped with every fiber of my being that I was hallucinating, insane from grief, that I couldn't be pregnant. I wasn't a bad person, and monsters weren't real. Unfortunately for me, only one of those statements was true. 9 months ago, I dug an old, nearly expired pregnancy test out of one of the cabinets in my bathroom, just to be sure. From the moment those 2 pink lines became visible, I wanted so fucking badly to believe that I was being handed the privilege of raising and nurturing a piece of my husband. I wouldn't allow myself to recognize that the estimated time of conception didn't line up with the last time my husband and I were intimate in that way, or the way that his appearance had begun to change before he was out of the picture. Color seemed to slowly drain from my husband bit by bit with each passing day, easily explained by his time spent indoors, away from the sunlight. Being out of work must surely have been what was smoothing out the texture covering my husband's body. The difference was only noticeable because his had been exacerbated by years of hard physical labor. It made sense that the darkness my husband dwelt in caused his eyes to sink in, irises round and dull. They were hardly visible around his equally round, dilated pupils. And without reason to use his hands much, it was understandable that my husband's had reduced to short, blunt digits. Excuses were easier than admitting that something was wrong. Changes are harder to notice when they happen to the person you spend so much of your time with, even if they're drastic. As much as I hate myself for this, the more difficult it became to recognize my husband once his appearance started to change. The easier it was for me to recall the similarities his features bore to the monster that stood outside my window. That was the first night the monster came. I sat up in bed after the faint sound of tapping roused me from my sleep. I instinctively reached toward the empty half of my bed as my eyes strained, trying to locate the source of the noise. A ghastly shade of gray outside my bedroom window stuck out to me. I threw my glasses on. Fuck, my heart sank. There was something lurking outside my bedroom window. Fear, in a way I'd never felt before, crept its way in, cold and hollow in my chest. I was in no way prepared to handle a peeping Tom or any sort of home invasion. I mean, who really is? I had no weapon, no dogs, no protection, nothing to deter someone from attempting a break-in. 911 can only do so much with spotty service and being 45 minutes away from the closest city. I fumbled for my phone while continuing to peer out of the window, the few inches that weren't covered by curtains. I could only distinctly make out a short, pale talon, and watched as it continued rapping against my bedroom window. The winter night was unforgiving. It cloaked whatever figure stood on the other side of my window in a deep, inky darkness, making it difficult to discern any features beyond the talons that tapped incessantly. What do you do in this situation? Realistically, I had no options. Until an actual threat was posed, there was little more I could do but to continue staring. So that's what I did. Wide and dry, I kept my eyes fixed on the talons that tapped on my window. It wasn't until brilliant sunlight suddenly stung my eyes, beaming through the gap in my curtains, that I realized I had dozed off. My memory of the previous night was still fresh in my mind. The anxiety that had built up in my chest had yet to even dissipate. It was all so strange, creepy, unnerving. Calling the police may have been the right decision to make, because a pervert watching me sleep was the likely culprit. But what predator tracks down a home tucked away in the woods, just to stand outside and tap on their intended victim's bedroom window for several hours straight? What police department would take a complaint like that seriously? Valid questions, but their answers do not matter. Not anymore, at least. There was an instinct, a gut feeling I had that held me back from reacting to the monster outside my window. Pinning the explanation for that gut feeling on an imaginative product of stress and sleep deprivation was easy. It probably even made sense. Unfortunately, nothing was going to have a chance to get better until I accepted the reality of my situation. But how can I be expected to accept something that shouldn't exist? It was a monster. Yes, a real living monster. If I opened my bedroom window, I'd be able to reach out and shake its disgustingly smooth hand. The cold wind would make my skin prickle as I'd stare directly into its depressingly lifeless eyes. Thus began a nightly, torturous ritual. 9 months, 275 nights. I was losing my fucking mind, who wouldn't? And where panic increased linearly, contempt grew exponentially alongside of it. I hated myself. I hated the monster outside my window. Most of all, I hated whatever the fuck the monster had put in my body. It kicked and writhed and made me miserable. The shapes that pressed against my belly with every blow were something unnatural that made me sick. I was scared, okay? My life is more important than an unwanted alien fetus, and I am not a bad person for prioritizing myself. Nobody is a bad person for that. Whatever I was incubating was largely to blame for the way that I fell apart. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't take care of myself. How can you eat or drink when anxiety is the only thing your body will let you swallow? How can you take your meds when you can't even brush your teeth, let alone be bothered to refill your prescriptions? How do you cope with your life that was already fucking shitty, when what should be impossible drags you deeper and deeper into madness? How can you stand to be completely isolated, with nothing to distract you from the scary fucking monster that nobody would fucking believe? Because it shouldn't be fucking real? The honest answer, I can't. I don't. I only woke up to blinding sunlight on the first night the monster visited. It was the only time I dozed off in that way, and the only time I stared at the monster for longer than 10 minutes. Like a goddamn 5-year-old, when I can't stand it anymore, I pull the covers over my head. I keep my eyes closed, but never really fall asleep. When the sun is bright enough to shine through my blanket, I know it is safe to look again. Looking at the monster outside my window never got easier to stomach. Like a car crash, though, I couldn't look away. Not until the panic overrode my system. Slowly worming their way out of impossibly black shadows, details of the monster's frame became more apparent as time passed. It felt calculated because I wasn't attempting to analyze the monster. I could hardly stand to fucking look at it. It was intentionally revealing these small traits, giving me the parts to a machine without the instructional manual. Wickedly colorless, the monster's skin was the same pale shade of gray as its talons, a stark contrast against every starless night sky it stood under. Fur, of some sort, sprouted from its head and face in an unrecognizable pattern. Dark, dull eyes, devoid of life, stared straight through me, the monster's expression never changing. Its pupils were so large and round, it's as if they devoured the irises entirely. Believe me when I say, friends, that I would have preferred sorrow to completely consume me, swallow me whole, and spit out the monster as a hallucination, a manifestation of misery, than to ever accept that a physical monster was what stood outside my window, tapping and whispering every night. Yes, The monster began to whisper too, unintelligible words, softly articulated, filtering through the window as if carried on a breeze. The monster's voice was mythical, like that of a siren's, tempting, luring me in with melodies full of promise, waiting for me to climb ashore and sign my own death certificate. And I was the crew member that had been left to die in the wreckage of my ship, swimming desperately toward the siren's euphonious ballad, oblivious to the monster that was hiding underneath its skin. If sirens were real, I'd have been able to crawl out of my bedroom window and be met with an unbelievable, unimaginable atrocity, beyond the scope of anything a normal brain could process. Before having the opportunity to sense the danger I was in, I'd have already been dead. The monster would have picked me right up and tore me limb from limb, savoring its meal as I bled out on the ground. I'd have been given the mercy of death, and my last conscious thoughts would have been filled with hope and desire. Sirens are a fairy tale. The monster outside my window is both halves of the Brothers Grimm. I've skirted around the topic long enough. My husband passed from a sudden cardiac event roughly 3 months before I discovered that I was pregnant. 3 months before the monster came to visit. My husband was, and still is, from the bottom of my broken heart, my entire world, my person, more than words could ever express. He was love, warmth, home incarnate. 6 years was not enough time. A lifespan wouldn't have been enough time. I'd never imagined a future without my husband in it. How could I? Even after our mortal bodies passed, I truly pictured our souls bound to an eternity together. An eternity of raw, wholesome love. Our words, delicate and tender, floating through time and space. A cadence not unlike the whispers that come from the monster outside my window. While I did my best, I can admit that my husband deserved better. The guilt, as you can imagine, will haunt me indefinitely. I will spend every fucking second of every goddamn day wondering how different things would have been if I'd noticed the way he was changing. How could I not recognize what was happening to my better half? I know what you're thinking. My husband was never a monster. He was full of love and warmth until the moment his heart stopped, and my love for him never wavered. I don't know what caused his changes, and it wouldn't matter if I did. My husband was different, but he was never a monster. Time was ticking for the creature growing in my belly. I had to accept and face what was happening. It was no coincidence that a monster came to my window the very night I found out I was pregnant. It was no coincidence that the creature growing in my belly felt more and more alien, in tandem with the intensity of the monster's nightly visits. I can acknowledge that my husband's condition resembled the monster outside my window, but I cannot stress enough, my husband was never a monster. The thing about the monster, though, the overarching question of why the abomination outside my window had initially been given that title. The monster is alien, not from outer space. Its features are just grotesquely unique in the most unsettling way. The monster incites such an intense fear because it is unknown, and how has history treated the unknown? The night before I went into labor, the monster once again came tapping. Over time, with every visit, its volume slowly rose from gentle whispers, growing louder and louder, more urgent, making it harder and harder to muffle. You have to understand, I had to protect myself in some way. I don't care if pulling the covers over my head was childish. I don't care if doing everything shy of killing myself was immoral. Somewhere in the storm, I had to figure out how to keep my sanity anchored. I had to find what I could control. I tried to be brave. I tried to stay confident. I tried to remain strong. I tried. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. Trying was pointless. I knew I would go into labor any day and gauged that it would be safe if I just pressed my ear to my bedroom window. To finally listen to what the monster had been saying. I couldn't imagine it would recite everything it's uttered over the last 9 months in a single night. But I had a feeling it would know I was listening this time. Getting out of bed, I knelt by the window and carefully pulled the curtain aside, just enough to press my ear against the cold, damp glass. A deep, booming voice, seething, almost vibrating in my skull, spoke. Abominations are born from me, and to me they will return. Murder, sickness, suicide, accidents, they always find their way back home. Children are not a consequence of your actions. My children, my abominations, bear that burden. Over and over, your kind fail, my children. I give my strongest to your weakest, and you still fail. My children will return to me, flesh or spirit, but you will not be absolved of your negligence. Why do I send my children to their death or great harm? They are different from you in ways you wouldn't understand or believe. My children will be fine. The wicked hearts I send them to will not. Wicked hearts deserve misfortune. Losing your husband, your sanity, everything but your life, was nothing compared to the fate you truly deserved for 9 months. I whispered from the other side of your window. How ironic that the only way you chose to protect yourself was by ignoring all that you'd need to know to make your burden your gift. What was the big secret? The answers you were so curious about but were too cowardly to listen to. What message could the monster outside your window want to convey? You won't like it. Wicked hearts never do. I told you everything you would ever need to know to take care of the daughter I sent you. Her anatomy, her expected development, what she ate, the conditions she would thrive under, the differences between your heart and hers, and how you could grow from that. What did you do? You childishly covered your ears. You starved yourself, refused necessary medical care, stopped taking your prescribed medication, and physically hurt yourself in an effort to miscarry. You call that brave? You call that confident? You call that strong? The monster then mocked me. But what was I supposed to believe with an abomination lurking outside my window every night? How could you expect me to believe a hideous, unknown creature was anything but evil? There was something foreign growing inside of me. How can you blame me for protecting myself, fearing that it would take my life? I didn't have an answer, but the monster didn't wait for one. Your heart has always been wicked. My son, your husband, returned to me once that became apparent. That's why I sent you my child, my abomination, my daughter, to be your burden. I knew what you would do with her. It's what all wicked hearts have done. Do not get my words twisted. Termination is not murder. A good-hearted mother's life should always come first. You may think I'm cruel, that my heart is wicked, for destroying your life in the way that I have. Justify that however you would like. You are delusional and your behavior is predictable. The day a wicked heart sees a stranger instead of a monster, guidance instead of damnation, gratefulness instead of revulsion, a bestowal instead of a burden, is the day I'll consider that wicked hearts can change. Until then, they'll get what they deserve. For 275 days, I tapped and tapped on your window, drawing your attention, revealing myself piece by piece through the gap in your curtains. Slowly, intentionally, waiting for the day your resolve would slip, and you would come to me. Waiting for the day you would throw the curtains aside to look directly at me, to satisfy your curiosity of wanting to know what your daughter will look like. Waiting for the day you would murder her. You will be going into labor tomorrow. I will be watching. The monster's words had barely ceased before the clock on my nightstand clicked over to midnight. I turned my head to get one last glimpse of the monster, only to be met with a pair of unnervingly deep, dark eyes, inches from mine on the other side of the glass. A scream escaping my throat, and an indescribable pain erupting in my midsection were the last things I remembered before my vision went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, disoriented and in pain. My brain throbbed as it became flooded with everything. There was a sort of aura I felt that I couldn't describe, though. It evoked an eerie degree of calmness that somehow held me together. It freaked me out, but absorbed the panic before it could melt into my nerves. Instinctually, I placed a hand over my stomach in an effort to ground myself and control the pain I was in. It was flat. My monster was gone. Before I could compartmentalize anything that I was taking in, a woman dressed in blue scrubs entered my room. "Hello, my name is Jamie and I'm a nurse practitioner." She spoke from just inside the doorway, almost robotically. The sight of someone normal, speaking normally, knocked the air right out of my lungs. How did she know I'd just woken up? "I stopped by to let you know that the doctor will be with you shortly," the nurse finished. I gestured vaguely toward my empty stomach, unable to form words. The concern etched into my face was palpable. I expected Jamie to turn on her claws and scamper away the moment she was done talking, but surprisingly, she didn't. Instead, the nurse hesitated, a look on her face that can only mean bad news is coming. "I'll go get it," Jamie said reluctantly, harshly whipping her tail as she turned to walk away. "It?" I took a closer look at myself and my surroundings after the nurse left the room, trying desperately to absorb the stillness that the hospital was providing. Objectively, everything was normal, in the sense that the shapes and colors were correct, but something was off in that the arrangement of them wasn't quite right. The silence was becoming nerve-wracking. The longer I sat, the worse it felt. I caught a glimpse of some faces as they walked past my room. Their expressions worried. Passers-by quickened their pace and averted their eyes. My mind was reeling, so many thoughts, so many questions. Keeping in everything I've gone through these last 9 months was smothering me. 275 days of solitude. The rest of the world could have burned to ashes, and me, isolated in my cabin in the woods, would have been none the wiser. But the world hadn't burned to ashes. The grass was still green, and the sky was still blue. Taking a glance out the window, I could see that crunchy leaves littered the sidewalk, while shades of orange and red danced together in the wind. I hadn't felt a breeze in so long. I bet the autumn air was crisp and refreshing. My body was probably relieved to be breathing anything other than stale cabin air. The view should have been breathtaking, but my senses were overloaded. There were too many lights, too many colors. The barren tree branches pecking against my room's window bore a nauseating resemblance to the monster I've been haunted by. I quickly looked away, wishing I had a blanket thick enough to shield me. The lack of postnatal care was beginning to put me on edge. Why was I still alone? Why was it so quiet? Shouldn't I be feeding whatever I gave birth to? How much time had passed since I'd given birth? Where was the fucking nurse that should be bringing me my baby? Baby? I sat with my thoughts, making friends with the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The more that time passed, the closer their humming sounded to faint whispers. Can you imagine what I was going through in this moment? 9 months of completely secluded torture, waking up in an unfamiliar space with no memory of getting there. No answers, forced to sit in agonizing silence when you want to scream at the top of your fucking lungs and rip your scutes out in a fit of rage. Forced to sit still while your body processes everything you denied to give it for the past 275 days. Time isn't real. I can't say how much passed before a different woman entered my room, cradling something small, silent, and unmoving in her arms. It was wrapped loosely with a blanket that was entirely too large for it. Is that what came out of me? My name is Dr. Howell, the woman spoke. You must be Ms. Farley. Can you tell me your date of birth, please? The way my brain stuttered before mumbling the correct numbers felt alarming. Is that my... I croaked, unable to finish my sentence. Sweat began to bead on my forehead. I hardly recognized my own voice. We need to talk about that, Dr. Howell replied, her face bearing a familiar mask of hesitancy. As she started toward me, she continued, I know you must feel very overwhelmed right now. She bent down and handed me the bundle from her arms. The fabric was soft and warm. I kept my eyes locked on Dr. Howell's. Despite my frustration, I wasn't ready to look. I have so many questions, I replied weakly, my lower lip quivering. I'll do my best to answer what I can, said Dr. Howell. It's going to be hard, but I need you to take a look at the child, for lack of a more accurate term, I've handed you. I took a deep breath. I'd held on to the hope that I was insane and this was all a nightmare, that I'd be pregnant forever, stuck in a layer of the afterlife, somewhere between limbo and hell. I couldn't believe that the time had come for me to look at the creature that had been growing in my belly. I closed my eyes, tilted my head down, and opened them. A scream clawed its way up my throat. It took every ounce of my willpower to choke it back down. The thing I was looking at was not conceivable. The pieces of the puzzle the monster outside my window had been giving me were finally coming together. The creature in my arms was the picture on the box. Tears sprang forth immediately. I ran a webbed hand over impossibly smooth skin. Skin so pale it was almost reflective. Glancing at the scales on my arms, I revered in the way they shimmered under the room's lights. A reminder that I was right to be disturbed by the creature that I was holding. The monster. My monster. I held the hand of my monster, feeling its short, detached talons, 5 on each hand. I recognized them as the shapes that had pressed against my belly while I was still pregnant. My monster was so still, so unnaturally quiet. Its eyes weren't open yet, so I pulled up one of its eyelids to look at the shape and color of them. Steely blue, dark and round, my monster's eye gazed upward into nothingness. Our eyes are never that dark, our pupils are never that round. Green, orange, or yellow, our irises take up the entirety of our eyes. With slits for pupils, they shine and allow us to expertly see in the dark. Something monsters shouldn't be able to do. The contrast between our eyes and those of monsters made my stomach churn. It wasn't fucking right. I opened my monster's mouth. It had no teeth and its tongue was fully intact. I ran a forked tongue over my own sharp canines, my mind breaking down with every infeasible characteristic it tried to process. Something fine and wispy sat atop my monster's head. It was soft and sparse, I had to feel the serrated texture of my own head to remind myself I wasn't crazy. This wasn't normal. I wasn't a bad person for putting myself first. The sun was setting outside the window in my hospital room, casting beautiful shades of gold across the sky. It felt like years had passed when Dr. Howell spoke again. "The thing you're holding is unlike anything anyone has ever seen before," she started. "But I'm sure you know that, Miss Farley. Where am I even at? How did anybody know where I lived or that I was going into labor?" I asked. "To the best of my knowledge, a 911 call was placed from your home describing your condition. Your location was then tracked by dispatchers, and you were taken by ambulance to here," Dr. Howell replied. "Do you know how long I've been here or when this creature, I meant to say, was born?" I inquired. Dr. Howell looked so tired as she responded, "You gave birth roughly 18 hours ago. Even after the best numbing agents we have, nothing was helping your pain. The only thing we could do was sedate you to ensure yours and your offspring's health was prioritized. Staff assisting the delivery were growing increasingly disturbed and ill. A few had to leave the room. To be completely honest, Ms. Farley, we were speechless. We were in no way prepared to see a creature such as the one in your arms. It defies all manners of biology that we thought we'd figured out. I wish I had more answers, Ms. Farley. After birth, we took the creature to another room to stay warm, but it still has yet to make a peep. Were it not for it breathing, you could tell me that creature was a stillbirth and I would believe you. The more time that passes, the more needs this creature is going to have. What those are or how to meet them, we don't know. The creature is going to suffer if it hasn't already begun to." "I fear you're going to have to make a choice, Miss Farley," Dr. Howell then said. Gooseflesh broke out underneath my scales as a chill trickled down my spine. I had the distinct feeling, the same feeling that's haunted me for 9 months, that I was being watched. I glanced over my left shoulder. No. Outside my hospital window, I could see the unmistakable outline of someone's head and shoulders. Not someone, something, the monster. Maybe if I shrieked until my voice gave out and started breaking shit, they'd lock me away in a place with no windows, where the monster couldn't stalk me anymore. There's just no way it followed me. There's no fucking way. I turned my head away from the window and fought back more tears. Nothing felt real. Dr. Howell studied my face while I tried to keep it as composed as possible. I knew what my choices were. There was only one. I wasn't proud of the decision I was forced to make regarding my monster. It made me sick to my stomach. Simply put, I didn't know what any of its basic needs were, and even if I did, I was in no way equipped to meet them. I was completely unprepared to take care of something that had never been known to exist before. Unable to give the quality of life that my monster would have deserved, the morally responsible decision was to terminate post-birth, which medical staff encouraged. I was told it was quick and painless, although it doesn't ease my remorse. It eats me alive. As horrible as my monster was, motherly love poured from my heart and seeped into my bones, a maternal instinct that my 6-pound abomination couldn't change. I came home from the hospital today. As guilty as I felt arriving empty-handed, a selfish wave of relief washed over me, thinking that the visits from the monster were over, that I could grieve, sleep, and climb out of the dark hole I'd fallen into without that creature dragging me back down. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes widened. The familiar panic was fresh and frigid. The nightmare was never going to end. I snapped my head toward the window. There it was. There it fucking was. Fury replaced fear. I should have just closed the curtains when I returned home from the hospital. Fuck, I should have closed them after the first time I saw the monster. Closed my eyes and ears with it on that first night and pretended it wasn't there. It wasn't that easy. The sadistic piece of shit creeping outside my window every night knew how to manipulate my senses to keep me in its grasp, to control me. It mouthed off on its soapbox, pinning me as a monster, as if it were the pillar of morality. There was nothing morally superior in any part of that freak. All I did was love my husband. I didn't seek medical help for him when his appearance began to change. He passed unexpectedly from something I had no way to prevent. That makes my heart wicked? What did I do? At what point did my beloved husband realize my heart was wicked? What power does the omnipresent monster outside my window possess to know exactly whose heart is wicked? How does it even determine wickedness? Why does it go through so many hoops to abuse people it deems wicked? Why? I yanked the covers off, ready to give the nightmare outside my window exactly what it wanted. Its features were crystal clear this time. I knew they would be. It wasn't possible to see its entire form through the small gap between the curtains, but I was sure it was smiling. Smug piece of shit. I stormed. No, stomped my way over to my bedroom window. Every thud landing with as much anger and strength that I could muster in my fragile state. "You didn't give me a chance to talk back last time," I said between the gap, a smile of my own stretching ear to ear. "Not so big and tough when your punishment doesn't pay off, huh? Freak of nature ruining good people's lives because your fabricated narrative of good versus bad is completely skewed from my reality. It was kill the thing or let it suffer. I couldn't give it what it needed. Nobody could. You're insane if you think suffering was the right choice for it. And you're insane for thinking a person would listen to, let alone believe, something as evil and vile as you. In my world, you have a wicked heart. You are the monster. You are everything you've crucified wicked hearts for. But you knew all of that already. You always fucking know. Get whatever the fuck you want to do with me out of your system and let me keep the sliver of life I have left." The monster was silent. Of course it was. But I knew it was still smiling. I couldn't take it anymore. In one dramatic rip, I tore the curtains down and glared straight into the eyes of the monster outside my window, just like it wanted me to. A wave of hysteria tried like hell to overtake me, but the pieces of the monster that had already been revealed to me over time held it back. The sound of something wet or sticky, writhing and squelching like a bucket of worms, cut through the stillness and broke my gaze from the monster's eyes. Below its waist, undulating tendrils snaked their way around the lower half of the monster's body, slimy and black. What the fuck? Legs, if you can call them that. I was looking below the waist of the monster, the parts that weren't visible from its usual stance outside my window, the parts that were concealed beneath the blanket my monster was wrapped in at the hospital. There was something stationary in the viscous sea of appendages. Multiple somethings. Children. Children that couldn't have been older than 5 or 6 surrounded the monster. All had extreme visible trauma, including exposed brains, protruding bones with thin layers of skin covering them, deep, long scars and open wounds across their bodies, missing limbs and other injuries too heinous to describe. How could anyone, anything, be able to stomach sending their children to a fate like those? How severe is the abuse the monster's children suffered to have accumulated those kinds of wounds? The monster outside my window remained wordless as I took in the harrowing scene. Then I saw it. Saw her. My monster. Though I only saw her briefly, bundled up in that soft blanket, I recognized her steely blue eye. The same one I looked at in the hospital before she was terminated. Detached from her skull, dangling by a meaty string, was her other eye. My monster was little more than a skeleton, her freakishly smooth skin stretched taut over her bones. Bones that were brittle and broken, skin that gleamed silver under the moonlight. The stars were out tonight. My monster had deep lacerations on most of her body, slowly oozing a thick red liquid. Barely detectable, I could see that she was shaking and twitching. Did I do this to my monster? Was this the result of neglect during pregnancy? What the monster outside my window accused me of? My monster was perfect at birth. There wasn't anything wrong with her. She died quickly and painlessly. Looking back, from the time I woke up in the hospital to the time I was discharged, everything went too smoothly. There was no outrage or panic, no fear or overt urgency. I was given space and time to process things as they unfolded. I was blanketed in that chilling serenity. Dr. Howell knew exactly what to say, as if she'd spoke it many times before. The first nurse that checked on me and the people I saw walk past my room exuded just enough unease to incite alarm in me as I watched them, so that I wouldn't really question them. Dr. Howell had lied when she said that my child was unlike anything she'd ever seen, which means she probably lied about the pain, too. Time was frozen, icicles chasing me through the rabbit hole I was spiraling down. My heart pined in a depressing way. Regret, already intense, fused with the rage that was pulsing in my veins. My false bravado faltered as tears gathered in my eyes, stinging as they spilled onto my cheeks. I was on the brink of collapsing when it dawned on me, when I finally put the fucking pieces together. How would the graveyard outside my window bear such extreme trauma to their bodies, if they were terminated after birth, like my daughter? Daughter. The monster doesn't keep its children once they return from their death sentence. It does something truly monstrous, something more deserving of that title than my subjective perception. The monster recycles its children. Recycling is the best way I can think to describe what the monster outside my window is doing with its children. Over and over, the monster sends them to whoever it deems has a wicked heart. While all come out unscathed after birth, the monster's children are mutilated in that hospital before being terminated. Every wound from every termination accumulates. The monster wants wicked hearts to believe its children's injuries are a reflection of what they'd sustained in utero. The monster then ages its children in a way that exaggerates those injuries, to induce as much guilt as possible when it brings them for its sick show and tell. How fucked up is that? How evil is that? I know what you're thinking. That the monster is right, I'm making this up to deflect blame, I caused all of this, I deserve it, blah blah blah. I am not evil. My husband, the sweet man the real monster supposedly sent me, where did he go? I don't recognize his face anywhere outside my window. How do I know the monster didn't drain and murder him on purpose, then lie about his return to further guilt me? Because my husband was never a monster. I am not a fucking monster. I don't know how long I stood transfixed before a mirthless laugh brought me out of my pensiveness. I once again fixed my eyes on the monster. It didn't take long for it to speak, reigniting that spark of hatred within me. No emotion you fill yourself with will defy the atrocities you've committed. Try as you might to convince yourself that I am evil and your heart is not wicked. The torment you've experienced is a reflection of that. It will haunt you for the rest of your days. And you deserve every bit of it. The monster outside my window broke into that shit-eating grin, revealing 2 perfect rows of straight, flat, pearly white teeth. My body was ablaze. It was time to end this fucking nightmare. Before I fed myself to the wolves, I spoke up one last time. If you were in my shoes, if you'd have been there, if you'd have witnessed it from my perspective, you would have done the same. The monster's expression never changed, and my blood was still boiling. Without thinking twice, I opened the window and stumbled out toward the monster. My bare claws sunk into the mud and brambles were catching in my scales as I approached it. The monster stood further back than normal, in order for his legs and children to be visible through my window. I closed maybe half of the distance before a mucky tendril snatched me up and pulled me nose to nose with the monster. It spoke. You see a monster, I see humanity. Another tendril forced my mouth open. The monster purged a foul black sludge and pushed every drop of it down my throat. I wanted to gag and spit it back up, but I couldn't. The monster kept me in its tight grasp as the sludge dispersed throughout my body. It wasn't until it fully sank in that I was released. Everything went black before I'd even hit the dirt. I woke up back in my bed. Sunlight beamed beautifully through my window, a sight I wasn't sure I'd ever find comforting again. My blankets were soft and warm. The smell of coffee permeated the air, and I could hear pots and pans tinkering in the kitchen. My belly was full. My medications were back on my bedside table. Beside them was a card, an appointment reminder with my primary care. Scars, chips, and burns to my scales were completely healed. It's as if the monster outside my window really was a nightmare and I had finally woken up. That time had turned back, or I was sent to a universe where my husband never passed away. I took a deep breath and pulled my covers off, excited but nervous to walk into the kitchen and be reunited with my soulmate. Something clattered to the ground as I stood. Startled, I bent over to pick it up. Shimmering in the sunlight, I held between my fingers one of my scales. No longer its usual vibrant blue, my scale shone a colorless silver. I cracked my bedroom window open and tossed my scale onto the grass. Out of sight, out of mind. The smile I was forcing did not reach my eyes as I strode into the kitchen. I always liked staying at my older sister Teresa's house and babysitting my little niece Chloe. My sister's house was big and nice compared to my crappy small apartment, and Chloe was very sweet and well-behaved. Teresa's fridge and pantry was always stacked with delicious food, and she had practically every streaming service on her Roku. Pretty much the only thing I disliked about that house was Ribbit. Chloe's favorite toy was a big talking stuffed frog that she simply called Ribbit. Ribbit had a dopey voice that simultaneously sounded like a bad impression of Goofy, Barney, and Patrick Star all at once. His dialogue consisted of 3 phrases: Ribbit, 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 I love you, and childish giggling. Each time I came over to babysit Chloe, the first few hours would go fine without a hitch. We would do things like play hide and seek or eat snacks. It was only when we watched TV together that things went south for me. Chloe would insist on bringing Ribbit downstairs to watch TV with us, and that stupid frog would always distract from whatever show we were watching with his dumb voice and repetitive dialogue. I remember one night when we were watching Moana, I politely asked Chloe if we could take Ribbit upstairs. She looked down at her toy, then back at me. "But don't you love Ribbit?" she asked. "Of course I do," I lied. "But he's a little loud and it's hard for me to hear the movie." She looked back and forth from Ribbit to me, then back to Ribbit. She then hugged the frog tightly, causing him to giggle. It was clear Chloe had made up her mind. No matter how much I tried to politely persuade or bribe Chloe each night, she refused to part ways with Ribbit whenever we watched TV. It was getting harder and harder to hide my irritation with that frog each time I babysat. One day I decided I would shut Ribbit up once and for all. Teresa and her husband Colin were away for the night, and as soon as Chloe was asleep, I got to work. I slowly crept up to her bedroom, where she lay fast asleep beneath her My Little Pony comforter, with Ribbit by her side. I carefully reached over with both hands and lifted Ribbit out of the bed. "I love you," the frog said. I flinched and looked down at Chloe. She was still asleep. I sighed with relief. She had always been a heavy sleeper, which is why I enjoyed babysitting her in spite of Ribbit getting on my nerves. Carefully, I took Ribbit downstairs, placed him on the table, and grabbed a set of scissors. As I approached the toy, I heard something that nearly made me drop the scissors in shock. "Don't touch me, you bitch!" I looked around, my heart beating rapidly, but didn't see anyone else in the room with me. Did Ribbit have a fourth phrase I didn't know about? I gently touched Ribbit. He just made his trademark giggling sound, causing me to sigh with relief. Just my imagination. I then got to work, cutting open his stomach before yanking his voice box out from within the cotton. After stitching the now silent Ribbit back up and placing him back in Chloe's bed upstairs, I went out to the backyard, dug a small hole in the corner by the fence, and buried the voice box where I hoped no one would find it. As I went back inside and laid down on the couch to sleep, I hoped neither Chloe nor her parents would be too upset with me for taking Ribbit's voice. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of Ribbit's voice giggling. I turned to see Chloe standing by the couch holding her stuffed frog in her hands. "Ribbit, Ribbit, Ribbit." I blinked a few times as I remembered last night. I had removed Ribbit's voice box. How the hell was he speaking again? "I love you." I noticed Chloe's mouth moving along with Ribbit's voice. Was she doing some sort of reverse ventriloquist trick where she was pretending the frog's voice was coming from her instead of the toy? She then placed Ribbit on the couch next to me and headed into the kitchen. I then heard Ribbit's distinctive dopey giggle, but it wasn't coming from the toy by my side. It was coming from the kitchen where Chloe was. Confused, I squeezed the stuffed frog. I couldn't feel any voice box inside. "Help me." My heart stopped. That was Chloe's voice, but it had come from Ribbit. I touched the frog again. "Help me, please." Chloe's voice cried out a second time. As I tried to figure out what was going on, I heard Ribbit's voice emit from the kitchen. "I told you not to touch me, you bitch." There I was, waiting in line for the ladies' room for probably the millionth time in my life. The rumblings of conversation from around me tickling my ears and begging me to listen in. Women of all shapes, sizes, and walks of life surrounding me in a malformed cocoon of social anxiety. I nervously fiddled with the bottom of my band tee, trying not to look anyone in the eye. Pairs of shoes stared up at me, judging my introverted nature. A woman in a biker jacket and tattered skirt that just barely kissed the bottom of her ass. Cheeks shuffled backward into me, causing my gaze to shift upward as I rambled an apology for existing behind her. Her piercing aquamarine eyes, sharpened by eyeliner wings, gave a quick flash of something like disgust, before averting themselves and focusing back on her friend. That's when I saw it. The room was empty of life. From where I was standing, I could see its walls were painted a dull hospital green, the floors lined with bright white linoleum that hadn't appeared to have seen the trotting of feet ever in its life. And stalls. Dozens and dozens of stalls cut off like cubicles, so that if one were to sit, you might see their head poking up above the sanitized walls. But it was a bathroom, it had to be, and I was already shifting in place, trying my best to hold on to control of my bladder, and I was losing it quickly. I pondered a moment on whether or not it was worth going in. Why hadn't anyone else? Maybe it wasn't open? Maybe it was a men's room? My bladder protested. Who cares? Do you want to piss yourself in front of all of these people? Walk back to the party covered in urine? No, I really didn't. So I squeezed out of line and gently prodded the door open further. The motion-sensing lights kicked on and I could see that it was definitely a restroom. There were sinks lining the wall facing the cubicles. A giant window peered over the room with its beige curtains shut tight like it didn't want to be caught peeking. I weaved my way through the cubicles, trying to find the one farthest from sight in case someone else wandered in. The toilets themselves were odd. Not really toilets, but more of a bench that several people could sit on with holes perforating the gentle slope to the drain. Weird. But the steadily increasing pressure in my bladder begged me not to think too hard on it. As I closed in on the very corner stall, I was greeted by the sounds of the conversation taking place outside, in the line bursting into the room. They must have seen me walk in and decided to investigate themselves rather than wait eons for the other restroom to open up. The ladies spread out like a swarm of flies looking for a place to land, and the stalls quickly filled up, including the one I was planning on using. So much for that idea, I thought. The biker girl and her friend took the spot I had set out for, and before I knew it, every single stall was full. The benches were shared by 2 to 3 women, engaging in conversation like it was completely normal to do so while you used the bathroom with your friends. I looked around for an open spot. It was hopeless. I didn't know any of these women, and despite being on the verge of wetting myself, I wasn't about to mix my pee with the strangers. As I weaved in and out of cubicles to get to the door, keeping my head down and avoiding eye contact at all costs, a loud mechanical clunking caught my attention. The curtains to the large window were opening, sliding back into the walls like a second eyelid. What laid beyond them was not the dreary, dark cityscape that waited outside the building, but what could only be described as the most brilliantly blinding light known to man. As the eye of the window opened, I looked around to see everyone had turned their heads to gaze into it. Their expressions, once vibrant with laughter and conversation, now drooping and void of any life. I waved my hand in front of the girl closest to me. No response, not even a blink. I had the feeling that if I turned and gave that light a longer gaze, that it would swallow me whole, and I would be transformed into a mindless husk like everyone else there. So instead, I looked around, unsure of what to do. I was terrified. I couldn't leave them like this, but what was this? How could I even help? I noticed that beneath every single person there was dark fluid leaking out, like oil seeping out of a leaky engine. The room began to smell. It reminded of the deer carcass in the woods my father and I had stumbled upon once when I was a kid. A thick stench that invaded my nostrils with putrid rot. This only increased my fear. I was no longer worried about having to piss as a warm patch had blossomed in the crotch of my jeans. I began to sprint toward the door. I was going to call for help, but I was stopped in my tracks as I reached for the door handle by a shadow rising up from the floor and slithering its way toward the ceiling. Something had risen and was blocking that unholy light. I turned around to see one of the women held in the air like a limp rag doll. Her pants pooled around her ankles and her limbs dangled lifelessly from her. I couldn't see her eyes, but I knew they were still staring blankly into the light. As I watched, she began to writhe and squirm, a low groan emitting from her mouth. Her stomach began to bubble and shift beneath her blouse like something was inside, trying desperately to escape. She began to turn slowly in the air until she was facing the rest of us. Her eyes were white and her mouth began to widen, the groan growing louder and more forceful. Her stomach had swelled so much that she almost looked pregnant, whatever was inside pushing the boundaries of how far her skin would stretch. I took a sharp breath inward, and at that same moment, she began to spew a dark, viscous liquid all over the girls sitting nearest to her. She looked as though she were deflating, the skin on her belly starting to wrinkle as it lost shape. The women before her stayed still in their stupor, not the least bit phased. Their faces became coated in the bile until it dripped from their chins in thick globs. It clotted like blood against their skin. The goo was in their open eyes and their mouths, and the stench that was already filling the room reached its peak. I struggled not to heave up my dinner, plastered in place with fear and fascination. The scene unfolding before me was disgusting, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away. I came to my senses when those that had been covered in her thick bile started to bloat and spew their own viscous liquid onto the next wave of people, and they in turn did the same until the whole room was covered in that foul-smelling fluid. I turned back to the door and tried the handle. It wouldn't turn. "This can't be happening, this can't be happening," I whispered. The rasping groan had returned, and it was growing. It echoed off the walls and became almost too loud to bear. I fought against the door, praying it would bust off of its hinges and let me go, but it wouldn't budge. I kept hoping someone might hear me as I slammed against it, but the hallway on the other side was quiet. I was faced with two options: either stay facing the door that blocked my only escape, or turn and face the horror behind me. I peeked over my shoulder to see what was happening, and caught a glimpse of a girl in a skin-tight sequin dress shaking violently. There were chunks of bile flying off of her, and the sequins on her dress danced in her frenzy. I could see her mouth starting to foam, saliva mixing with the dark clotted ichor that was in her mouth. I felt a scream threaten to burst from my mouth, but caught it just in time to watch her contort. Her joints looked unnatural and loose, spinning freely, making her skin pucker and twist. She scrambled to her feet, her knees bending first in the wrong direction, making her look like she would fall face first into the pooled stomach contents on the floor. The others were getting up too. I turned around and watched as every single one of them frantically got up and began to come toward me like a pack of hungry wolves. None of them could stay up, their limbs sliding around their failing joints, but they were determined. The groaning was intolerable. The stench was unbearable, but I couldn't stay standing there. I frantically looked around for some way to escape. They were coming but slowly, foam seeping from their open mouths and their soulless white eyes wide open. They kept falling over each other, but not once did they look anywhere else. Their gaze was fixed on me. I found a vent just large enough for me to squeeze into, just above the sinks to my right. It was loose and probably my only option for escaping whatever the fuck was happening in the bathroom. I quickly dashed to the sinks and climbed up. They were only a few feet away, and I couldn't afford to lose any time. I wrenched the vent open, splitting open my finger in the process, and started to pull myself in. At the sight of the blood on my finger, the contorting mass went into a frenzy. They quickly closed the gap, and I could feel one of them pulling at my feet. I lost my hold on the vent and crashed down onto the sink. My leg was being held by a behemoth of a woman. Her once probably beautifully and meticulously curled blonde hair was matted and hanging limply from her skull. Thick foam spattered her lips as she opened her mouth wide and snapped at my feet like a wild rabid dog. A terrible sound coming from deep in her throat. It was like the gurgling of a thick pasta sauce boiling. Her teeth making an awful clanking as they tried desperately to make purchase in my flesh. I could see her stomach filling, bubbling under her thin floral printed shirt. The seams of it looked like they were about to burst. I kicked at her face desperately. She was strong. Her fingers dug into my ankles. One of my kicks landed square on her jaw, and it slid out of its socket, leaving her already gaping mouth hanging open even farther. Her grip loosened, and I wrenched myself back up onto the sink and up into the vent. The duct was too narrow to move through. So I sat there sobbing for what felt like hours. When I dared to look out into the bathroom, they were still there, surrounding the sinks with their blank stares aimed right up at the opening. The light from the open window casting shadows into their mouths that made them look endlessly deep. I had no hope of moving farther into the vent, and I sure as hell wasn't going to go back the way I came. So I waited, hoping maybe the horde would move and I could find another way out. I was sliding into sleep when I heard the jingle of keys and a voice in the hallway. "I don't know what you're testing in here, but can you make sure you clean up after yourself this time? It fucking reeks, and last time I got it on my clothes. Took weeks for that smell to come out." When the first voicemail came, I was in the middle of eating dinner, mindlessly flipping through the news on TV. The screen on my phone lit up and I barely noticed it. Spam calls were part of my daily routine, but this time it wasn't a scam. It was a voicemail from a number I hadn't seen in over a decade. It was from her. "Hi, it's me. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need you to listen carefully. You can't trust him." The voice was unmistakable. It was Lauren, my wife, the woman I buried 10 years ago. I dropped my fork, the clatter making me jump. For a second, I thought maybe it was a prank. Some cruel scammer who'd found her voice on old videos I'd foolishly uploaded to social media. But then I listened again. There was something about the way she spoke, the cadence, the inflection, the breathiness at the end of her words. It wasn't just Lauren's voice. It was her. She'd been dead for 10 years. Lauren had been my everything. When she died, I was a husk of myself wandering through days I can barely recall. A car accident took her from me, quick and brutal. The driver was never found, and now her voice. It was impossible. The voicemail was time-stamped only a minute before I played it, and when I tried to call the number back, it rang to nothingness. No dial tone, no voicemail box, just an endless void. I listened to the message again and again, the words embedding themselves into my mind. You can't trust him. Who? Trust who? What was she warning me about? The next day at work, I was distracted. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. Every voice in the office sounded like hers. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore and drove home. I needed to listen to it again, maybe find something I'd missed. But the message was gone, not deleted, just gone, as though it had never existed. No call log, no voicemail history. My heart sank. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe grief had crept back in, a decade late, gnawing at my sanity. That's when the second voicemail came. You need to get out of the house, he's watching. I froze. My heart thundered as I glanced around my living room. It was daylight, the sun streaming in through the windows. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of being watched was suffocating. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I drove aimlessly for hours, Lauren's voice playing over and over in my head. By the time I returned home, it was dark, and the house felt different. The air was heavy, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. And then I noticed the picture frame on the mantel. It was Lauren's favorite photo of us, taken on our honeymoon. I'd smashed it years ago in a fit of grief, the shards of glass long since swept away. But now it was back, whole, perfect. I was shaking as I approached it. My breath caught when I saw the note tucked behind the frame. He's in the basement. Adrenaline surged as I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and crept down the stairs. The basement was cold and damp, the single bulb casting long, eerie shadows. At first, I saw nothing, just old boxes and a faint smell of mildew. But then I noticed the corner. The shadows didn't line up. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. The air seemed to hum, and for a second I thought I heard whispering. When I reached the corner, I found nothing but a mirror. It hadn't been there before. The reflection wasn't mine. Lauren's face stared back at me, her eyes wide with terror. Her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. My knees buckled as the mirror seemed to ripple, the glass warping as though she was pressing against it from the other side. Then the whispers started. I bolted, slamming the basement door behind me. My mind was racing, my pulse deafening in my ears. I couldn't make sense of it. Lauren's warnings, the mirror, the voicemails. None of it felt real. That's when my phone buzzed. Another voicemail. It's too late, he's already inside. I have spent the last decade of my life working in a tribal jail. When I first started, I was told 5 rules I had to follow to survive. These rules weren't for handling inmates or dealing with life as a CO. They were for how to survive the paranormal. I thought it was all bullshit and superstition. I could not have been more wrong. The first thing I noticed about this facility, it borders the start of a dense, ominous forest. When I arrived for my interview, I stepped out of my car and looked at the trees and hills behind the facility. It looked like they went on forever. The view was serene, and if I didn't know better, I would have thought the buildings in front of me hosted retreats and camps. The razor wire, however, quickly ruined the illusion. After my interview, it took about 3 weeks before I got the call offering me the job. I came in for my orientation on a Wednesday. It was all the normal onboarding stuff. HR forms, uniform and equipment issuance, facility tour, meeting my supervisor, and getting my training schedule. I got assigned to the graveyard shift, working Friday, Monday from 2100 to 0700. Not the ideal schedule, but I was the newbie, can't really complain. I was told by the jail administrator, the warden if you will, that I was to report for my first day that Friday. I walked into the briefing room at 20:30 on the dot and took my seat. "Hey, you the new guy?" A deep, gravelly voice from in front of me said. "Yeah, that's me," I said. I looked up to see a man standing in front of me. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, about 6 feet even and slim but well-built, wore a plain black hat and had a nicely cropped beard. He looked at me with piercing green eyes, seemingly looking into my soul. "I'm Jay," I said. "I don't care," he said. "Once you're here for more than a month, then I'll care to learn your name." He then turned around and sat down in the chair in front of me. I looked around to see everyone else just talking and joking with each other like nothing had happened. "What the fuck was that about?" I whispered. Don't mind Will, he's just tired of losing rookies. A soft voice to my left said. When I looked over, I saw a woman sitting next to me. I'm Val. It's your first day, right? She asked, extending her hand for a handshake. Jay, I said. I shook her hand. If I had to guess, I'd say she was in her early 40s. Val was slender, had long brown hair styled into a tight bun. Yeah, it's my first day. I had my orientation on Wednesday. What did you do before this? Asked Val. I worked security, I said. Nice, said Val. Have you worked graves before? Yeah, I actually was on graves before coming here, so hopefully the adjustment isn't too bad, I said. Val opened her mouth to reply, but cut herself off as we heard the door open and turned to see Corporal D walk in. Corporal D was an imposing figure, to say the least. He was 6 feet 5 inches and had to be at least 270 pounds. He wasn't pure muscle, but sure as hell wasn't fat. He had a look to him that gave the impression he was not someone to cross. All right, he said with a deep booming voice that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Here's what we got going on today. To give some insight, this is how a standard briefing goes. It usually starts with a general rundown of what happened on the prior shift. After that, the supervisor will typically give out the post assignments, followed by any special tasks or assignments if there is any. Most of the time, that's the end of it. The supervisor will ask if there are any questions, very rarely is there, and then dismisses us to go to the floor and start shift. Sometimes, though, there is some housekeeping that needs to be addressed. This could be anything from addressing issues to brief training on a new policy or procedure. That's how that briefing went. Nothing exciting happened on swing shift, and no special assignments. There was, however, an issue to address. So, to address the elephant in the room, we have a rookie, announced Corporal D. Officer J, stand up and introduce yourself. Yes, sir, I said. I then rose from my seat and noticed everyone staring at me. Not sure of what exactly I was supposed to say, I managed to choke out, "Hi, everyone." I then attempted to sit back down before Corporal D stopped me saying, "Tell us a little about yourself. Have you worked in a jail before? Have you worked graves before? Do you believe in ghosts?" I could almost see a sly smile on Corporal D's face. I have not worked in a jail, let alone been in one before. I have spent the last year working graves doing security work. As for if I believe in ghosts, I laughed. No, I don't believe in ghosts or ghouls or things that go bump in the night. I'm not a kid. I smiled until I noticed everyone's faces go from smiling to serious. Corporal D looked at me and said, "Oh, you will." He then looked back down at his papers. "All right then, everyone has their assignments. Officer J and Officer Will, stay behind. Everyone else, get to work." Everyone but Will and I stood up and left the room. Not before a couple mocking somebody's in trouble comments. Once everyone left, the room was silent. Will was the first to speak. "What did I do this time?" Corporal D narrowed his eyes at Will before cracking a smile. "You kept bitching that the last rookie wasn't being trained right. Because they weren't. I spent half the time untraining the bullshit they learned working on day shift. That is why we lost him," Will said. Corporal D shot Will a look that reminded me of when your mom hears you swear. "Well, I talked to the brass and got them to try it your way this time." Will looked surprised. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Jay is fresh blood. He hasn't had any prior training. This is your opportunity to prove that your way of training works," Corporal D said. "However, if you fuck this up, we'll both be held responsible. Understood?" "Understood. Thank you for the opportunity, sir," Will said. "Jay, you will be attached to Will's hip. If he needs to shit, you help him wipe. Make sure you listen carefully to everything he teaches you. If you do that, then you'll turn out just fine," Corporal D said before putting a 3-ring binder on the table in front of me. "This binder contains every policy, procedure, and schedule you need to know. Consider this an extra limb during your training. If you don't have it with you every day, then you aren't ready for work. Read every page carefully, memorize it," he said. Corporal D then leaned in close. "I mean it, Jay, read every fucking word." "Yes, sir," I said. "I promise I won't let you down. I'll read it on my weekends if I have to." "I hope not. I have you and Will working general population tonight. Get acquainted and don't be afraid to ask questions, even the stupid ones. I can guarantee you can't ask anything more stupid than a lot of the questions inmates ask," he said. After that, Will and I walked out of the room. "Is he always that serious?" I asked. "Who, Corporal D?" Will chuckled. Nah, he just looks mean, but the guy's a teddy bear. It just takes a while for him to warm up to you. When we walked up to the entrance of H-Pod, I started to get nervous. Damn, it's nice out here, I said in an attempt to clear my head. Not even a breeze. Makes me wish I was at home to take it all in. Will looked at me and rolled his eyes. During my tour, I had only seen the unit for a brief moment, but now I'd be spending my first shift here. The door cycled and we walked into the officer station. The inmates refer to H-Pod as the fishbowl because of the way the building is laid out. When you first walk in, there's the officer station, a desk with a bunch of drawers filled with miscellaneous papers and hygiene supplies, a computer and phone. To the right, 1 house, left, 2 house, and in front of the desk, 3 house. There are the 3 housing units with windows spanning the walls so the officer can see into the units from the officer station. Each unit is identical, a bathroom with shower stalls and toilets next to 2 rows of bunk beds, and spanning the width of the unit is the day room, consisting of a few bolted down tables and chairs. On one wall of each unit is a phone and a video visit station. Each unit can hold roughly 25 inmates. The entrance door then began to cycle. So we got to do a head count with the swing shift officer and get passed down, Will said as we walked through the door. Just as he said this, the radio chimed off. Attention in the facility, formal head count is now in progress. Will and I proceeded into the officer station and placed our things on the desk. Holy shit, who the fuck let you in here? The shout came from the man sitting at the desk. Oh, sorry, I'm Schmidt, you must be Jay, right? Yeah, that's me, I said. Schmidt was an older, heavyweight man with a mustache. He was well-kempt but looked like he was a few years past retiring. Didn't know they made uniforms that big, Schmidt. Did the department have to special order it? Will said. Schmidt stood up and laughed. Fuck you, Will. Let's count so I can get the fuck out of here. Schmidt turned to me and asked, You do know how to count, right? Before I could answer, Will said, Of course he does. Will looked at me and said, Just take your boots off and use your fingers and toes if you get confused. The two laughed for a moment before we all walked to the first unit and counted. Once we finished counting the units, Schmidt sat back down at the computer. Will sat on the desk next to Schmidt, and I stood off to the side. Anything to pass down? Will asked. Number ain't shit happened out here today. Although 2 house has been pretty needy, replied Schmidt. There might be a few guys needing phone pins, but other than that, everyone is pretty much squared away. Just glad it's Friday, now I start the weekend. Any plans? Will asked. Aside from cleaning your mom's plumbing, no, joked Schmidt. Just plan on taking it easy and lounging around. I just saw her and she didn't mention having a plumbing, Will began to say before dropping his head laughing. Took you a minute there, didn't it? Laughed Schmidt. Rook, sometimes you have to give Will a minute to process things. He's special. His mom told me that. Schmidt laughed, slapping Will on the leg. I chuckled to myself. So how do you know when it's time to leave? I asked. Just as the words left my mouth, the radio keyed up. Attention in the facility. Formal head count is now clear. Almost immediately after the transmission, a different voice came over the radio. Swing shift. Complete your pass down, clean up your area, finish any reports, and you are clear to go. I could feel Will and Schmidt looking at me. Never mind, guess that answers my question, I said. Well, Will, looks like you finally found a trainee that's up to your speed, Schmidt said, laughing while patting Will on the shoulder. Jay, don't take it as if I'm picking on you. This is how we joke around here. It all comes from a good place. If anyone genuinely offends you, let them know, Schmidt said. And if anyone gives you shit, you let it fly right back at him. He grabbed his things and logged out of the computer. Stay safe tonight, guys. I'll see you later. Have a good weekend, you fat bastard, Will said. Later, I said. Schmidt then left. Well, it's just you and me, Rook, said Will. Grab your binder and find your login info for the computer. Let's make sure it works before Sergeant Wells leaves. I grabbed my binder and found my login info. Luckily, it worked. I then began to flip through the pages of the binder while the computer loaded up. Inside, I found the HR manual, facility policies and procedures, inmate handbook, and a weirdly discolored copied picture of uniform standards. I got to the back and found a single page titled, 5 Rules Every Officer Must Follow to Survive Graveyard. It was photocopied and looked like the original was at least 15 to 20 years old. I took it out of the binder and held it up to Will. Is this some kind of prank or something? I asked. Like some way of adding a little humor to the dry material? Will looked down and saw what I was holding. His face dropped. "Oh, make no mistake, that is no joke. I will take care of the first check while you get settled, but I recommend you read those rules first." He stood up and walked towards one house. While Will did the cell check, I read the rules. Rule 1, don't whistle at night. Rule 2, take a partner when doing a perimeter check when possible. If you must do it solo, just look at the fence and walk as quickly as possible. Do not talk to the woman in the tree line. Rule 3, if an inmate says they saw a shadow with nobody attached to it, acknowledge them, then move on like nothing was said. If you see a shadow with nobody attached to it, just turn and walk away. Rule 4, if you hear your name but nobody is around, act like someone was there and shrug it off like you just missed them walking away. If you hear someone talking to you after shrugging it off, do not follow the voice, especially if you are outside. Rule 5, if you see them and show fear, you're already a goner. Just go with them and don't try to bring anyone else with you. This has to be a fucking joke. There's no way it's not, I said. I set the paper down and leaned back in the chair. It's not a joke and it is real, Will said as he walked by me. We'll talk more about it when I'm done with the check. Finish logging onto the computer. Will then opened the door of 2 house and walked inside. I finished setting up my profile and waited for Will. I looked over towards 1 house and looked into the window. I could see the light from the setting sun on the wall. Most of the inmates were already in bed. I heard the sound of someone tapping on the window behind me. "What's up?" I yelled before I turned around to see nobody there. I expected to see someone standing at the entrance door, waiting for it to cycle so they could come in. I expected something. I brushed it off as a mixture of the wind and my senses being heightened after reading the rules. After another couple minutes, Will returned having completed the check. "Hey, you got logged in. Awesome, there's been too many times where rookies log in just didn't work. Usually it's from the sergeant fat fingering the keys and adding an extra character. Just pull up the logs and find the tab titled Cell Check. From there, just type HPOD Cell Check Complete and hit Save," said Will. I did as he said, and we sat in silence for a moment. "So are you going to explain how the rules aren't actually bullshit?" I asked. Will sighed and sat back on a chair he found in the storage closet. "Do you really not believe in the paranormal?" "Number, I really don't. Every time I've heard anyone tell me a story of their experiences, it's always been explainable in one way or another," I said. "Have you ever experienced anything you couldn't readily explain?" Will asked. "Honestly, no, I haven't. I've never seen a shadow moving on its own or heard a disembodied voice or heard something only to see nothing there. It's not like I'm closed off to the idea of it. I just haven't experienced anything that has definitively proven it to me, and I'm not about to go searching for it either," I explained. Will eyed me curiously. I could tell he was trying to read me, and I don't blame him. I was doing the same to him when he talked. "So you didn't hear the woman tapping on the entrance door window?" Will asked. "You mean when the wind? It must have blown something at the door or something," I said. "You know damn well there's no wind," Will said. "Wasn't it you who pointed out how there wasn't even a breeze earlier?" "Yeah, I said that, but it's been a while since we were out there," I said. I then turned to face the door and looked at the treetops in the distance. After a minute of staring at the trees and not seeing them move even in the slightest, I turned back to Will. "It could have been a random breeze that popped up and blew something." "Yeah, sure," Will said, a tinge of annoyance in his voice. He turned his chair to face me and leaned forward, looking me in the eyes. "Listen, I have been working here for about 3 years now. For the last year, I've been a trainer. In that time, I have had a hand in training about 10 rookies. Each one of them started on day shift and were sent to me after a month or 2. You are the first I have gotten fresh. I will say this one time. If you listen to me and follow what I teach you to the letter, you will survive." I could see a mixture of passion and pleading desperation in Will's eyes when he said that to me. "How many of the rookies you've trained are still here?" I asked. Will sat back in his chair and sighed. After a moment of silence, Will said, "About 5. 5? I yelled. "How the fuck did half of the rookies you've trained quit?" "I never said they quit," Will said. "Then what happened to them?" I asked. Will looked at the computer before saying, "They didn't follow the rules." Will's voice was solemn, and I could tell he wasn't telling me everything. "Listen, you aren't ready for those stories. It's your first night. We'll get into that later. For now, focus on learning the job, and when you are ready, I'll tell you." You can't just drop this on me and then tell me I'm not ready and move on, I said. How am I supposed to not make the same mistakes as those 5 if I don't know what they did? Will scowled at me. His tone changed from helpful to serious. All you need to know right now is that they didn't follow the rules. Will stood up and looked down at me. Drop it. I'm serious. Learn the rules and follow them. He barked before turning and walking into the bathroom. Yes, sir, I said as he walked away. I was curious about what happened, but knew better than to press it on my first day. As I sat at the desk, I could hear the sounds of snoring and toilets flushing in the units. I opened the binder and put the sheet with the 5 rules back in its place. I skimmed through the employee manual when I heard the bathroom door open. Hey, Rook, it's time for a check. Let's go, Will said. Just like with head count, follow behind me. We then walked through the first unit. Once inside, I heard the door close behind me, and I quickly caught up with Will, who was a few feet in front. We walked down the aisles, and as we were going into the bathroom, I heard what sounded like the unit door cycling. I looked at Will, who shrugged and kept walking. When we went to exit the unit, the door was secured. We exited and finished the rest of the cell check. As the night went on, that's how it went. We'd do a cell check and sit back down and talk about the job. Will would explain how to do certain things and what he has found works for him, and what he sees works for others. Sometime around 0500, Will sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. I think we've gone over enough work-related BS for the night. Why'd you take this job? Will said. Honestly, I said, I needed the money. Will laughed. At least you're honest. Most guys spout off some bullshit about helping the community or want to make a difference. Some of them really did mean it, but the majority of us just needed a job or needed to make more money. I was kind of taken aback. Here I thought I took this job for selfish reasons and assumed everyone here wanted to be a part of the change. It was a little bit of a confidence booster knowing this. I think Will could see this on my face. In the end, it doesn't matter what brought you here. At the end of the day, you showed up. In my book, there's no selfish or noble reason to work in this field. There's showing up and doing the job, and there's showing up and then bailing. That definitely helps my psyche a little, not gonna lie, I said. When I started working security, everyone had the same precedent for taking the job. The money wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination, but it was there. Will chuckled. Yeah, that sounds about right. Security is shit work and even shittier pay. He looked back up towards the ceiling and asked, So what did your friends and family say about it? I sighed and looked down at the desk. Well, my friends said I was crazy. My mother-in-law, however, said that I would make a terrible officer. And your wife? He asked. She didn't say much, but I could tell she's worried. I said, she'll be fine, fuck your mother-in-law for saying that, though. Will said. We both laughed before doing another check. When we got back to the desk, I asked Will, So what about you? Well, I took the job because I needed one, he said. Why'd you stay? I asked. I stayed because I fell in love with it. I love the people I've worked with. The pay ain't bad either, Will said, nudging me with his elbow. After about an hour, Will and I were sitting at the desk. While I was reading over the set of 5 rules, I heard a loud yell saying, Help me! Followed by incoherent screaming coming from outside. It sounded like a female voice. What the fuck was that? I said. You heard that too, Will asked. Hang on. Will reached for the phone and called control. Hey, are you guys having fun without us? He paused for a second. We just heard someone screaming, Help me, from outside. I thought it was someone fucking around and finding out. You sure you didn't hear it? His face went pale. Yes, I know the rules. Just let me know if anything comes of it. Will then turned towards me. They don't know what the fuck that was. From right at the H-pod entrance door, we could hear tapping. J-A-J-J-J. A female voice was chanting my name at the door. Help me, Jay. I looked at Will, who was frozen, staring at the computer screen. Remember the rules, act like it's not happening, and just stare straight ahead. Will said, Fucking help me, Jay! The voice screamed. The door began to shake violently, and the taps turned to booming thuds. Jay, I know you can hear me. I can see you shaking. The thuds grew faster and began to take on this wet sound, almost like whatever was hitting the door was bleeding. You fucking coward, Jay. They will eat your eyes and fuck the holes left behind. When he is done with you, you'll wish you went to hell. One more loud, shrill scream came from the door before it was silent again. Whoa, what was that? I said shakily. My whole body was trembling. Please tell me this is some kind of sick hazing tradition, I begged. Will shushed me and whispered, "Shut the fuck up." After what felt like eternity, but was only about 5 minutes, Will looked at me. His eyes were misty and it sounded like I could almost hear him sniffle. "Have you ever been here before?" he asked. "Number outside of my interview and orientation, this is my first time here. I'm not even from this area," I said. "Can you please explain what the fuck that was about?" That was something I have not experienced in a few months. I've experienced her several times over the years, and no matter how it goes, you never get used to it, Will said. "We've taken to calling her Banshee. Now, if that's what she is, I don't know, nor do I care to find out." "How did she know my name?" I asked. We both were looking dead ahead still. "Nobody knows how any of them know anything about us, but they do," Will said. "So what do we do from here?" I asked. We sat in silence for a moment before Will shook his head and said, "I'll report it to Corporal D and let you know what he says." Will stood up and looked at the time. "Let's do a check real quick and then I'll see if Corporal D will come out here for a minute." I stood up and panned my eyes from Treehouse to the entrance and exit doors. That's when I saw it. Will," I said. "What's up?" he asked. "Look," I said, pointing at the entrance door window. "Well, that's new," Will said. We both stared at the door and saw written in blood on the window the words, "Jay, help me." "Let's do this check real quick," Will said. "The quicker we finish it, the quicker I can talk to D." There were only a couple of inmates up when we did our check in one house. "Hey, CO, can you tell that bitch outside to shut the fuck up? We trying to sleep in here and she woke a few of us up," one inmate said. "Yeah, the guys inside are dealing with it. Sorry, man. Caught us off guard too," Will said. "You guys hear anything before the screaming?" An inmate that was laying on a bunk along the wall facing outside sat up and looked at us. "Yeah, I heard scratching on the wall for about 20 minutes or so before the yelling happened," he said. "Anything else?" I asked. "Actually, yeah," the first inmate said. "It looked like someone was looking in the window before we heard the scratching sounds." Will pointed at the window on the wall. "That window?" he asked. "Yeah," the inmate replied. "That window is at least 9 feet off the ground," Will said. The room went silent. Nobody said anything else after that. Will and I continued our check. None of the other units reported hearing anything. We returned to the desk and Will called Corporal D. "Hey, Corporal, can you come out here for a minute? Got something you need to see," Will said. Right as he hung up the phone, we both looked at the door again. "Holy shit," I said. The writing was gone. We both approached the door and looked at the glass of the window. "No sign of it being cleaned off," I pointed out. "Yeah, no sign of rain either. What the fuck, man?" Will said. I could tell he was frustrated. He quickly returned to the desk and called Corporal D again. "Hey, instead of coming out here right away, I need you to review cameras," Will requested. "Yeah, the entrance door, between 0500 and 0520. Tell me if anyone approached it or cleaned the window." "Hey, Will," I said. I gave the window a further inspection. What I initially saw gave me the chills. The same layer of dust was on the window with no signs of anybody touching it at all, let alone signs of someone writing on it and then cleaning it off. "What's up, Jay?" Will said. I turned to look at Will. When I made eye contact with him, his eyes went wide. "Doesn't look like..." I froze when I saw his expression. "What?" Will didn't say a word but pointed back at the window. When I turned back around, I saw it. What the actual fuck? There wasn't anyone on the other side of the door, but something was writing on the window. J was the first word finished. It took a minute, but we both watched as the words were written. J will die. When I looked closer, it was unmistakable. It was written in blood. Just then the phone rang. Will picked it up. "H-Pod Officer Will." I walked back to the desk. Though I couldn't make out what the voice on the other end was saying, it sounded panicked. Will's face went pale. "Understood. I'll let him know." He hung up the phone and looked back at the window. "We haven't experienced this before. Unexplained knocks, shadows moving, disembodied voices, sure. But this..." Will paused. "I haven't seen writing inside the fence before." "What do you mean by inside the fence?" I asked. "Most of those rules are for when you are out on a perimeter check. I've seen my fair share of weird and unexplainable shit here, but nothing like this," Will said, not taking his eyes off of the window. He composed himself and looked back at me. "So, a bit of bad news. I can promise you, Nothing is worse than seeing your name written in blood 2 different times, I joked. Well, we are going to have to stay behind for a debrief with Corporal D, Will said. Just then I saw a flash of light come from outside the door. Once my eyes readjusted, I could see Corporal D standing there with a camera. Holy shit. I've heard stories from back in the day when this would happen, but they always said the evidence disappeared before they could collect evidence, Corporal D said while he was walking through the door. He pulled out a collection kit and took a sample of the blood. Hopefully this comes back with something. Maybe then we can get some answers. What do you mean answers? I asked. Need to know basis, Rook, Will said. And trust me when I say you probably don't want to know. Corporal D laughed. Will's right, kid. If you need to know, you'll get an update. Corporal D walked up to the desk and saw I had the rules sitting on top of my binder. Oh good, you're learning the rules. He looked at me with a grin. So, you still not believe in ghosts? I can confidently say I am not sure at all anymore, I said smugly. Listen here, smartass, Corporal D said. Let's see if that opinion changes. He looked at Will now. I'm gonna steal your rookie for a little bit. Will looked at Corporal D, then at me and said, Sounds like a plan, sir. I then followed Corporal D up to control. What's going on, sir? I asked. I grimaced as the words left my mouth, realizing I should just keep my mouth shut. You'll see, he replied. When we got to control, I could see the camera viewing H-Pod was up on one of the screens and it was paused at 0455. Have a seat, Corporal D commanded. I sat down and watched the screen as Corporal D hit play. I watched as Will and I could be seen at the desk and all the inmates in the units were sleeping save for 1 or 2. After a minute of nothing, I saw it. There was a dark shadow-like mist that formed just outside the wall to one house. It morphed into a humanoid form and appeared to climb the wall before seemingly peering into the window of one house. It then disappeared before reappearing outside the entrance door. What the fuck? I said. Just then I could hear the screaming and yelling. The shadow appeared to slightly lose shape with each scream. The camera switched to the interior view. I could hear the tapping on the glass. It switched back to the view with the shadow. Then it happened. The door bowed with each bang. I watched as red blotches appeared on the glass of the window. Then silence. I looked closely in disbelief. No fucking way. The shadow reached an arm up to the window and began to write. But from the camera, it was different. I could have sworn it wrote, Jay, help me. But when I looked at the footage, it had changed. It said, you could have stopped this, Will. The shadow disappeared right after the writing stopped. That's weird, I said, confused. What do you mean? Corporal D asked. When we first saw it, the writing said, Jay, help me, not that, I said. Corporal D looked shocked. He quickly picked up the phone and called Will. Hey, Will, what did the writing on the window say the first time, not the one I got a picture of? Corporal D looked back at me. I was still watching the footage. Will and I got up and did our check and the writing just vanished. I looked back to the camera that viewed the desk. It was then that Corporal D's words rang in my head. Oh, good, you're learning the rules. I remember putting that paper back into the binder. Actually, I know that I did. I watched as the shadow appeared at the desk. Corporal? He snapped his attention to me. You may want to see this. He hung up the phone and we both watched as the shadow opened my binder and took out the paper with the rules on it and placed it on the desk. Wow, Corporal D said. We continued to watch as the shadow disappeared again. Corporal D switched the camera back to the view of the door. The shadow didn't reappear this time, but the words J, will, die, spelled themselves out on the window. And now we are all caught up, he said. What did Will say was written the first time? I asked. Same shit you said, he replied. So let me ask you again. I cut him off. Yeah, I'd say it's safe to say I believe now. Corporal D laughed and patted me on the shoulder. Didn't think something would happen this soon. Sorry you had to go through this on your first night, he said. Just get back to your post and tell Will there's no need for a debrief after shift. Thank you, sir, I will deliver the message, I said, standing up. As I walked out of the room, Corporal D told me, Oh, and Jay, don't quit on us now. Sir, I said with a smile. I quite literally can't afford to, so I guess I better get used to this kind of shit. When I got back to H-Pod, Will was sitting at the desk. How'd it go? He asked. You definitely need to see that footage, I said. Oh, I plan on it. Will laughed. Hey, when the daywalkers get here, we'll leave this out of our pass down. They don't understand, and I don't feel like explaining my sanity. I just nodded my head in agreement. The sun began to rise, and the day shift officer arrived, and we did head count. Once we finished telling him how nothing happened, we left. As we walked out of the facility, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being followed. When I got into my car and looked out the windshield, I thought I saw a woman standing in the tree line, staring right at me. Remembering Rule 2, I turned my car on and drove home. I should have known something was off the moment I stepped onto the ship. The air felt wrong, heavy, oppressive, like it carried a weight only I could feel. But I brushed it off. After all, this was my first real vacation in years. A week-long cruise to nowhere, just open seas and a chance to disconnect. The first 3 days were everything I'd hoped for. Endless buffets, lazy afternoons by the pool, and drinks that seemed to refill themselves. But on the fourth night, everything changed. It started with a noise. I was lying in bed in my tiny cabin when I heard it. Something metallic like a chain dragging along the floor above me. It stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving behind an eerie silence. I chalked it up to some late-night maintenance and forced myself to sleep. When I woke up, the ship wasn't moving. I pulled back the curtain and stared out at the ocean. Nothing but endless gray water stretching in every direction. No islands, no land, no other ships. Just us, suspended in a vast void. I headed to the upper deck expecting an announcement or some kind of explanation, but the crew was tight-lipped. The captain, usually a smiling presence at every dinner, was nowhere to be found. By evening, rumors were spreading. Some said we'd hit something, an iceberg maybe, though we weren't anywhere near Arctic waters. Others whispered about engine failure, but none of that explained why the Wi-Fi was down, why the lights flickered even during the day, or why the lifeboats were gone. That night, the sound came back. This time, it wasn't just above me. It was everywhere. A scraping, dragging noise that echoed through the halls like something huge was crawling across the ship. I wasn't the only one who heard it. People gathered in the corridors whispering, their faces pale. And then we saw her. She was standing at the end of the hall, a woman in a torn white dress, her hair wet and matted like she'd just climbed out of the sea. Her eyes, they weren't right. They were dark, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. Someone screamed and she disappeared. Panic spread like wildfire. People barricaded themselves in their cabins, but it didn't help. The ship was massive, yet it felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in as the air grew colder. The next morning, people were missing, whole families gone without a trace. Their cabins were untouched, their belongings still there, but the beds were soaked, the sheets smelling faintly of salt water. By the 6th day, there were only a handful of us left. We tried to stick together, but the ship seemed to work against us. Hallways twisted and turned, leading us back to where we started. Doors that had been locked swung open on their own, revealing rooms filled with seawater. And then there were the whispers, soft, insidious voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. We didn't belong here. On the 7th night, I found myself on the deck staring out at the black, churning sea. The others were gone, taken, I assume. I didn't want to think about how or why. That's when I saw her again, rising from the water like a ghost. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but her eyes, they burned with an ancient, malevolent hunger. I don't remember jumping overboard, but I must have. The next thing I knew, I was floating in the middle of the ocean, the ship a distant shadow against the horizon. A cargo ship found me 2 days later, delirious and half-mad. They told me I was the only survivor, that the cruise ship had vanished without a trace. I still hear the whispers at night, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her face. I don't think I escaped. Not really. I think Max ate my rabbit. Yesterday morning, the cage was empty. Dad said Carrot must have dug a hole to escape, but I know that's not true. When I came into the living room, Max was chewing on something. It smelled weird, like hot metal. There were white hairs stuck between his teeth, Carrot's fur. When I tried to pull it out of his mouth, he growled. Not like usual, not like a dog. It was a deep, strange sound like a machine jamming, and he looked at me with a bizarre expression, a kind of almost human smile. Max never smiles. Last night he started doing really weird things. I couldn't sleep. I heard Max walking up and down the hallway, his claws softly scraping the floor. Normally he sleeps in the living room, but this time I don't know why he was there, pacing in the hallway. He stopped in front of my door, and I think he said, "Clara." It was just one word, that's all. But his voice, it wasn't normal. It sounded like he was trying to talk without really knowing how, like he was imitating someone. The syllables came out slowly, interrupted by wet, sloshing sounds. I pulled my blanket over my head, hoping he would go away and that I was just having a bad, overly vivid dream. But he kept going. "Clara, hungry." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I heard the doorknob turn softly. "Clara, open." He didn't push it. After a moment, his claws moved away down the hallway. I stayed frozen until the sun came up. This morning I tried to tell Mom, but Max was right next to her, sitting at her feet. He wasn't doing anything, but he was staring at me, like he was listening to every word I said. When I started to speak, he slowly opened his mouth just enough to show his teeth. I didn't continue. Mom didn't notice anything. She just laughed, half annoyed, half teasing, saying I looked tired. Max kept staring at me even when I went upstairs to my room. That night he came back. This time he opened the door. I don't know how he did it, but he managed, and when I woke up he was sitting at the foot of my bed. I could hear him breathing. It wheezed like something was stuck in his throat. "Clara, friend." His voice was worse than before. Every word was broken, like he was ripping the sounds out of his mouth. "Friend, you." "Max, hungry." I pressed myself against the wall at the head of my bed, trembling. He stood up slowly, his claws snagging my sheets as he moved. When he brought his head close to mine, his breath smelled awful. "Clara, you." Quiet. He tilted his head and I saw his tongue slide over his teeth. His jaw moved awkwardly like he was trying to smile again. Or them pain. This morning Dad wasn't here. His car is still in the driveway, but I can't find him anywhere. When I asked Mom, she said he probably went for a run. But why are his shoes still by the door? Max, meanwhile, is in the living room. He's chewing on something. When I get closer, he turns toward me and drops what he was holding. It's a watch, Dad's watch. His lips are red. I ran to my room to write all this down. I don't know what to do. Max has been scratching at my door for 10 minutes. He's not talking this time, but I can hear him breathing. It's worse than his voice. If someone finds this note, just know one thing. Dogs don't talk. If yours starts to, run. If you ever go into the South, don't go to Mr. Weller's clinic. This was my experience with his clinic. In fall of 2020, during my freshman year of college, I went to visit my family for fall break. I went to school in the New England area, I'm not going to say which state, and my family lived in the Florida Peninsula. My girlfriend, I'll call her Amy for the post, wanted to meet my family. I decided to rent a car and drive down to them. The 26-hour drive would make a good time for us to look at nature. We would stop at popular hiking trails along the way. About 13 hours into the trip, when we were stopping for gas, a weird man approached me. "I see you've got New England plates. What brings you all the way down here?" he asked. Frankly, that's none of your damn business. I retorted, wondering why the hell he was even talking to me. "Got some spirits, don'tcha?" he asked, more stating than asking. "Mr. Weller's like a boy with some spirits." "Get the hell away from me, weirdo!" I yelled as I got back into my car. I sat down and looked at Amy. Who the hell comes up to people and stares at their license plates? "Maybe he's trying to be nice," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "You should go apologize." That's not going to happen. I pulled out of the gas station to continue the journey. This next leg was going to be 100 miles driving through the woods. Luckily, there was a convenience store about 5 miles ahead. It was the longest 5 miles I've ever driven. On one side of the road was a wall of trees. On the other were more trees. The road was completely straight, but the speed limit was only 45 miles per hour. Lifted trucks came and went, always riding my ass, then passing the moment the road was clear. I almost hit 13 deer, 4 ducks, and a kid on a four-wheeler. When we finally arrived at the convenience store, something felt wrong. My intuition doesn't usually tell me much, but when it does, I listen. Unfortunately, this was the week I learned to trust it. When we entered the store, every eye in the place was locked onto us. Worst of all, that creep from the gas station was there too. He must have been one of the lifted trucks that passed us on the way here. We tried to shop without letting them bother us. Amy was good at it. I couldn't even tell if she had noticed the eyes on us. What a small world. The creep was back. If y'all are going to go down on I-118, you might want to stop on by at Mr. Weller's clinic. He said, point in the direction we were going. Oh yeah? Why do you say that? Amy asked, as if she didn't realize that this was weird. Well, we always need more blood. He paused for a moment. That sounded worse than I meant for it. He's a phlebotomist. He said as if we were supposed to know what that meant. Oh, blood donation, that makes sense. Amy responded. I was beginning to think that she wasn't pretending to ignore how crazy this was. Well, John is actually a universal donor. Oh, really? Mr. Wellers is going to love that, he said with a grimace in his voice, one that Amy was either ignoring or was completely oblivious to. Just follow me and I can get you two to Mr. Weller. Ah, well, we don't really have time for that. I'm trying to go see my family for fall break, I said, obviously trying to get out of this situation. It's fine, we were already a day ahead of schedule. I can only assume Amy trying to get us killed. We can go give blood to a small community that really needs it. It will be fun. Then it's settled. I'll show you the way to Mr. Weller. He declared, a large grin forming on his face. He'll love to get a universal donor on his hands. I should have left. I was going to leave, but I couldn't leave Amy. I should have left Amy, but I didn't. I could have, though. I want to make it clear that I stayed with Amy and went to Mr. Weller's clinic. And that was a mistake. We drove through the woods, onto a back road, onto a gravel road, onto a dirt road. We finally arrived at Mr. Weller's clinic. Amy seemed excited to donate. The clinic looked like it had been abandoned for decades. There was a tree growing out of one of the windows. Amy didn't seem to notice, which is odd because she was usually the perceptive one. The crazy old coot led us into the clinic where we say a chair at the front desk facing the other way. It was like a Bond movie when the villain wasn't revealed yet. The crazy man started talking to the receptionist. He had a full conversation with them, but they never responded. Amy even chimed in occasionally, but the receptionist never talked. They even laughed at a joke no one told. After maybe 30 minutes, a tall, slender man walked into the room. He was wearing a lab coat and a stethoscope. He was well-groomed, blonde hair and gray eyes. Nothing was physically wrong with him, except that he was the only normal thing in the room. He was obviously Mr. Weller. Who do we have here? His calm, soothing voice came sliding out of his throat. He's a universal donor. The creep uttered, I know how you love the universal donors. Well, that's great, Bart, thank you. Mr. Weller had a smile on his face. It seemed genuine, but nothing here was what it seemed here. If you just want to come on back to office with me. He walked through the door he had just come through. I can't explain why, but I followed him into his office. Bizarre, isn't it? What is, other than everything? It almost feels like they're not real, doesn't it? He asked, looking into a clipboard. Like they can't see what this place really is. What is this place then? I asked, with one hand on the door. I should have left then and there. In my mind's eye, I see it, don't you? He asked, still prepping the procedure. Almost Lovecraftian. What is this, some kind of pagan ritual? I asked, just to try and buy time. I decided that I wasn't going to deal with this alone. Amy, you're going to want to see this. What's going on, Derek? Amy asked, as if she didn't understand. Do you need me to hold your hand? Bart walked in with her. I sat in the chair to have my blood taken. So, Doctor? Weller, how long have you been doing this? It's just Mr. Weller, he said with a doctor. Weller nameplate on his shirt. I have been serving him new blood for nearly 40 years. Him? The creature. I felt a breath on my neck. It's right behind me, isn't it? I bolted out of there and grabbed Amy's hand. I still had the needle in my arm. What are you doing? Amy yelled, looking confused. As we passed the receptionist's desk, the chair was turned around and there were just bones in the chair. This place was cursed or something, I guess. We got back in the car, I took the needle out of my arm, and we continued our journey to my parents' house. Amy broke up with me after the trip was over and we were back in New England. She thought it was weird that I left the clinic like that. I will never go back to Mr. Weller's clinic. The first video arrived at 3:33 a.m. One new message from yourself. In it, I was sitting in a coffee shop I'd never been to, wearing clothes I didn't own, laughing with people I'd never met. The timestamp read, yesterday, 2:15 p.m., exactly when I'd been in my quarterly budget meeting at work. I checked my call history. No outgoing messages at 3:33 a.m. Checked my sent folder. Nothing. Checked the video metadata. File created. Never. The second video came the next night, same time, same sender. This time I was on a beach at sunset teaching a dog I don't have to fetch. The timestamp matched my dentist appointment from that day. My dentist confirmed I'd been in his chair at that exact time getting a cavity filled. The videos kept coming each night, always at 3:33 a.m., always showing me living a life I had no memory of. Playing piano at a bar. I don't play piano. Rock climbing. I'm terrified of heights. Speaking fluent Mandarin to an elderly couple. I barely know English. Each timestamp perfectly aligned with moments I could account for elsewhere. Moments with witnesses, paperwork, security footage. I started documenting everything. Recording every minute of my days. Installing cameras in my apartment. Collecting alibis and timestamps and proof of where I was. But the other me, the one in the videos, had proof too. Restaurant receipts started showing up in my email. Photos tagged on social media. Business cards with my name and face but different credentials. Concert tickets in my wallet that I never bought. Then came the letter. Dear Time Thief, you should stop documenting your life so obsessively. It's getting harder to edit you out of mine. Yes, mine, because this is my life you're living in parallel. My time you're stealing 1 second at a time. Did you really think you were the original? Check your earliest memory. Really check it. When exactly does your life begin? What's the first thing you remember? Let me guess. 6 years ago, the hospital. Waking up after the accident with no memories before that moment. That was no accident. That was your creation point. When you split off from me like a temporal tumor, started living your own version of my life in parallel. Every moment you experience, you're stealing from me. Every breath you take should have been mine. You're a temporal parasite, feeding off my unlived possibilities. But I found you, and I've been documenting everything you've stolen. The videos aren't showing you a life you don't remember. They're showing you the life you're preventing me from living. Every time you make a choice, the life I would have lived splinters off, becomes a video delivered at 3:33 a.m. A record of what you stole from me. Want proof? Check your bedroom wall, behind the mirror. You know, the one you've always felt weird about but never knew why. Go ahead, I'll wait. The real you. I ran to my bedroom, tore down the mirror I'd never hung but had always been there. Behind it was a hole. Inside, hundreds of hard drives, each labeled with a date, each containing thousands of hours of footage. Of me, living lives I don't remember. But they weren't just videos, they were windows. Through each one I could see myself living another life. All happening simultaneously. All real, all authentic. And in each one I was staring back through the screen, watching me, documenting me. Each version convinced they were the original. Each one thinking the others were the thieves. As I write this, I can see them. Hundreds of me, all writing the same words. All making the same discovery. All coming to the same horrifying realization. None of us is the original. We're all splinters, fragments. Each of us stealing time from an original that no longer exists. Each convinced we're the real version. The others are parasites. But here's the true horror. This message you're reading. You didn't choose to read it. You're stealing that choice from another you. One who chose not to read it. One who's living a better life right now, untouched by this knowledge. Check your phone, it's 3:33 a.m., and you have one new message from yourself. Want to see what choice you just stole from yourself by reading this? Want to see the life you could be living instead? Just press play, but remember, the you that's watching isn't the only you that's watching back. We're all thieves here, all living on stolen time. And it's 3:33 a.m. somewhere, always. Check your phone, see? I'd heard the stories. Everyone had. About the whispering stalker, a creature that roamed the forest, stalking its prey with a slow, relentless pace. They say you hear it first, a whisper just behind you, low and coaxing, calling your name. Then you start to feel it, a presence lurking just out of sight, getting closer, always closer. The last thing you hear before it takes you is the sound of its dry, rasping breath in your ear. I'd never believed the stories, not until I found out who it really was. The truth was that it was a man in his late 20s, finding young women to murder and use to his heart's content. I found that out from my uncle, a police officer who warned me of who my father really was and why he worked so late. The story was buried by the town, but it couldn't disappear from me. I was hanging out at Chris's place one afternoon when I mentioned it, the usual cryptid banter. "You ever heard of the whispering stalker?" I asked casually, sipping my soda. Chris snorted. "It's just another one of those creepy stories people tell around campfires, like that damn Wendigo crap." Mia, who'd been listening quietly, frowned. "No way, my aunt told me about it when we were kids. She said it was real. People went missing out in those woods." I laughed, but I wasn't really joking. I could see it in their eyes. They were already buying it, and that's when I planted the seed. "You know," I said, leaning in like I was sharing some big secret, "there's a place not far from here. It's where the stalker's been spotted the most. They say you can hear it if you're quiet enough. If you listen long enough, you'll hear it whispering your name, calling you in." Mia shifted uncomfortably. "That's messed up, man." Chris was more skeptical. "You really think we should go looking for this thing? Sounds like a joke." I let that doubt settle in the air. "I don't know, I think it might be worth checking out. We could hike into those woods tonight, see if we hear anything. If nothing happens, we turn back. If we hear something, well, maybe we'll be the ones to prove it's real." Mia hesitated. "I'm not so sure about this." "Come on," I said, keeping my voice light. "It'll be fun. We're not really gonna find the whispering stalker. It's just a story, right?" Mia finally gave in, probably because she didn't want to seem like the scared one. Chris reluctantly agreed too, but I could tell he wasn't fully on board. That night we met up in the woods. It was cold, the moon hidden behind clouds, casting the forest in a thick, dark blanket. We had our flashlights, but the beams barely cut through the trees. I could feel the tension between us, and I knew it was the perfect time to make it real. I led the way, pretending to look for signs of the stalker. Scratches on trees, disturbed ground. I let the silence grow, let the tension build. Then I made my move. I started to whisper, just faintly at first. A low, barely audible sound, something that might be mistaken for the wind or the rustling of leaves. But it wasn't. It was me, using a recording I made a few days prior. At first, Chris and Mia barely noticed. Then, I made it louder, clearer, like a whisper right behind them. "Chris, Mia." They stopped dead in their tracks. I watched as their faces shifted from confused to terrified. I let it hang in the air for a moment before I spoke again, this time a little louder. "Come closer." Mia's eyes went wide. She looked around, her breath quickening. "Did you hear that?" Chris laughed nervously, but it was shaky. Okay, that's enough. This isn't funny anymore." I didn't stop. I couldn't. "Come closer." Mia's voice was trembling now. "Please, can we just go back?" But it was too late. I'd already set it in motion. In a panic, I grabbed the rope from my bag. I was quick but calm. I had them where I wanted them. Chris tripped, backward into the underbrush, and Mia froze, trying to understand what was happening. I didn't give them the chance to fight back. The forest was still. The wind had stopped. It was so quiet that all I could hear was their panicked breathing and my own. I watched as the fear set in, as they realized what was happening. The stalker wasn't coming for them. I was. It was quick. Too quick. A few stabs, just enough to keep them quiet, and it was over. Their bodies were heavy on the ground, their faces twisted in fear, still trying to scream but unable to. I didn't feel anything. Not guilt, not fear, just satisfaction. I had continued what my father had to stop. I dragged their bodies deeper into the woods, making it look like the stalker had taken them. There were signs, broken twigs, torn fabric. No one would suspect me. No one ever did. The next morning I went home. I washed the blood off my hands. I acted like nothing happened. But then tonight, I was lying in bed, replaying the events in my mind, my heart racing from the thrill of it. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, that faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, the trees, but then I heard it again. "Alex, Alex." I froze. My blood went cold. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. The whisper came again. Closer this time. "Come closer." I slowly turned my head, and there, standing just outside my window, was a figure. It wasn't tall, not like I expected. It was hunched, its face hidden under a dark hood. Its body was long and thin, like a twisted version of a man. And from beneath the hood, I saw its eyes glowing faintly, yellow and unblinking. The whispering stalker wasn't a story. It was real, and it was waiting for me, to punish me for doing its job. Scary stories didn't scare me, not anymore. These days I have to find other ways to get my scares. These days I get my fix mostly by watching videos of things that I shouldn't be watching. I do this on my phone in the dark before bed, because these are not videos meant to be watched during the day. That's what I'm doing tonight, and if I let my eyes wander just a bit to the space where the blue light drops off to pitch black, I can sometimes catch a glimpse of movement. I'll see part of a face or a long bony appendage reaching out for me. But the second I turn my light to it, it's gone. But while I wait patiently for the witching hour, summoning dark thoughts and other dark things, let me tell you about the things that used to scare me. Growing up, campfire tales had done the job just fine. We'd lived on the edge of the woods, so it was something I could treat myself to even at home. I could sit at the start of the forest with my little brothers and we'd tell each other horrors. I was never happier than when I was imagining something reaching out from the darkness. The scariest story, though, the one that genuinely terrified me and the one that wasn't any fun, was one my mother shared with me on my 12th birthday. She told me of my great-great-aunt Polly, a girl who'd loved the macabre just as much as I did. Mommy Dearest told me this story out at the edge of the woods, where the darkness was close enough to reach out and swallow us both if it wanted to. Polly had lived out in the country in a house not unlike ours, and close enough that we could drive past the old ruins if we wanted to. And years later I would, looking for answers that I would never find at some bare brick foundation. Anyway, Polly had loved the forest dearly, and more than anything, she loved the forest at night. She liked to wander out and build a fire. Sometimes she'd even fall asleep out there, staying lost until sunrise. She was always reading horror, Poe and the like. She had no interest in anything else. I understood that well. There was a coziness to being scared. Polly didn't have many friends, I understood that too. So when her 12th birthday rolled around, she hadn't had a party or gone out to the diner. No, she'd packed up her bag and her books and wandered into the woods. My mother didn't tell me about Polly's parents and if they'd ever objected to her venturing off all alone. So whether she snuck out or simply walked out, Polly left that night and never came back. They'd found what was left of her a week later when her teacher notified police she'd been missing. Why her parents hadn't reported her missing, my mother didn't say, and I didn't ask. The pieces of Polly that the police pulled out of the woods were her right leg, her head, and part of her torso. Animals had made off with the rest, and everyone had assumed that animals had been what had killed her. Now I know that what killed her was something much worse. Now I know that if she'd just put out the fire, just braved the darkness, she would have been fine. At least she would have survived that night anyway. See, it's not the darkness that draws in the monster, it's the light. It's the flame or the flashlight or the phone that makes you an easy target. Right now, I think I've mostly given up on tonight being the night. I've stopped looking at the edge of darkness, and instead I focus on the carnage I hold in my hand. It's cartel executions tonight, but there's a lot of sorting through the ones I've already seen. No one values originality anymore. Back when my mother told me about Polly, though, I took the tale as a cautionary one. I thought that Mother was simply warning me about the dangers of staying out by the fire alone. And it did deter me to a degree, but it didn't stop me. I just tried harder to rope my brothers into staying out later with me. But when they went inside, sometimes I stayed out alone. Sometimes I sat and I looked into the woods and I thought about how nice it would be to let the darkness take me, to lose myself completely to the monsters and the ghosts that made me feel so comfortable. 2 years after I heard of Polly's fate, I was turning 14. We'd moved to a house in the city, in a place where the danger of wildfires meant I had to find a new hobby. I transitioned to reading by candlelight. I suppose flashlights would have worked just as well, but I missed the warmth and the smoke of my childhood backyard. Candlelight felt like keeping a small part of that alive. Mother sat me down on my birthday again, which I only knew about because I'd kept track. I knew by then that it wasn't an occasion to celebrate. My little brothers would sneak me a small party later that night with cookies and candy and whispered congratulations, but by then they too understood that I was different. They knew that celebrating out in the open would infuriate our mother. When Mother said, "I want to tell you a story," I dimmed the kitchen lights and lit a candle. Might as well set the mood. I was never short on candles. In fact, the one regard in which my mom not only cared but spoiled me was in buying me candles and books whenever I asked for them, and sometimes even when I didn't. This story was about my great-aunt Miranda. By then I'd gathered that it was only a matter of time before we dropped the greats altogether. I knew there was a story much closer to home, but I let Mom tell the stories in the order she wanted. I listened to Miranda's story, but really I wasn't thinking about her. I was thinking about Mom's sister. I figured that would be the story that would give me real answers. Miranda, like Polly and like me, had been a child obsessed with death and doom and gloom. She'd lived in a house in the city not far from where we lived at the time. By then I understood that that was more than mere coincidence. Miranda had been a bookworm, always staying up late to read by candlelight. They'd had electricity back then, it wasn't that long ago, but Miranda had loved the flames. I understood that well. Mom didn't elaborate on what she read, but I knew. The same books as me and all my predecessors. I knew where the story was going because by then I was aware of the pattern in our family's history. I wondered if Miranda had known too. Had she gone into her birthday afraid, or had it been a relief? She'd been 14 when she died. Being inside this time, it was harder to blame what had happened to her on animals. Something had taken her heart, her left eye, and various bits from her torso. The cuts weren't clean, and had she not been in a locked room, had there been any signs of forced entry at all, police might have guessed a bear had broken in. Fantastical as that was, it made the most sense, as the edges of the wounds were ripped apart with teeth and claws. I've looked her up since then. Nowadays, a story like that would draw attention, but back then it spread only in the town news. I didn't find pictures of Miranda, but I found drawings. Sometimes I like to look at them late at night and anticipate what's coming for me. Now, as I lie in bed, I trace my fingers along my body and I wonder what parts of me the monster will take. I was ready, and I waited for the beast with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. I had butterflies in my stomach like I was going on a date, but I wasn't sure how it would go. Sometimes I fantasized about slaying the beast. Sometimes I went to bed with knives or a bat tucked under my bed, ready to end this curse once and for all. On other nights, I went to bed naked, ready for death. Sometimes I pictured myself in another life, born to another family. I wonder, if I hadn't been raised as someone already doomed, would I still be so desperate for something bad to happen to me? It was my 16th birthday when I got the full story about Mom's sister. She didn't tell me her name. Mom told me it didn't matter. Just like my name didn't matter because I was never going to live very long anyway. Mom and her sister used to share a room. They were in a small apartment like the one we'd moved to after our first house in the city. Mom and her sister used to stay up late into the night talking and giggling and, of course, reading each other scary stories. They'd tell each other all the classics, the ones written for the dark. They'd stay up at all hours hiding under sheets and reading by flashlight. Mom said she never felt scared, not really. Not when they had sheets to protect them from the dark. I think maybe my grandparents had hoped the curse, or whatever it was, wasn't real. Mom didn't remember them treating my sister any differently. She didn't remember them warning her about the things lurking in the dark. She says she wishes she'd known not to be so close to her. After a lifetime of trying, she's convinced my brothers not to be too close to me. When the monster or ghost or curse, whatever you want to call it, came for my aunt, my mother was in the room too. She'd watched the beast dissect her sister and take what it wanted. She was the first eyewitness who could describe the monster, at least in our family's recorded history. She passed that sighting down to me, making me the first in a long line who knew what was coming for me. I was scared for about a year after that, scared for the first time in so long. I didn't want to die, but you can only be scared for so long before you get used to it. Then you start to crave it. Being afraid loops back around to some strange, comfortable feeling. I was ready to star in my own horror story. After all, that's what my entire life had been building up to. My own 16th birthday was spent alone in the dark, but by then that was how I preferred things. Lying in my room now, I'm ready for the beast. It's cold tonight, I get cold so easily, and the thought of dying makes me feel warmer. It makes me feel safe. I feel like In my internet pursuits, I've seen every conceivable way to die. I've seen all the greatest hits and then some. People sucked into machinery, people skinned alive, people killed in front of their loved ones, hacked to bits by a cameraman who just laughs and laughs. If you've seen every possible way to die, death doesn't seem so scary anymore. Who knew smartphones would revolutionize the campfire story so well? How convenient, how delightful to have both the light source and the horrors coming from the same place. I don't know what time of day I was born, or even if today was certain to be the day the beast would come. I dug further into our family records, and though the beast had had a penchant for birthdays the last few generations, strange and gruesome deaths had plagued our family at all phases of life. It was getting late, and I was feeling less hopeful that tonight would be my date with death. I was about to give up and go to sleep, but as the carnage on my screen and the cheerful music drew to a close, I heard the closet door creak open. Let's fucking do this, I thought. I kept my phone on. The screen paused at the moment of someone else's death. That seemed fitting. I didn't turn on the flashlight, but the screen would be enough. Light was important, like a moth to the flame. The monster was drawn to the edges of the dark. I'd often wondered if I'd start to regret taunting the beast and welcoming the darkness when it actually came for me. Would I actually be scared when I finally heard fleshy footsteps at my bedside? But in that moment, all I felt was anticipation. It was here, and I'd been waiting so long. I held out my phone, and the flickering light showed me one long spine with bony bits sticking out, ribs and leg bones attached in place of vertebrae. It was a beautiful sight. The beast panted heavily as it moved, its footsteps disjointed from a dozen limbs working poorly together. Flesh on the beast was sparse, only what it had deemed worthy to take from its prey, which left windows into its insides. I spotted several hearts, and a pair of lungs that I knew had come from my aunt. The creature's organs pulsed an irregular kind of rhythm, but didn't seem to be working in the same way they had in their original bodies. The breathing was right next to my ear now, so I moved my phone light up, tracing all along its long spine and rotting legs. Finally, I reached a broken open skull with mismatched eyes and fleshy bits bulging out through various holes. Just do it, I said. Let's get this over with. But it just kept breathing in my ear, its warm breath a welcome relief from my cold and lonely bedroom, in my cold and lonely house. Mother had taken my brothers away for my 18th birthday, and they hadn't even said goodbye. The beast rasped in air, and I waited for it to bite me with stolen teeth, but instead it spoke. "You're not ready," it said, its voice that of death and decay. "I am," I yelled. "I'm fucking ready. I've been ready, just fucking kill me already." "Where's the fun in that?" it asked. I looked into its eyes, one gray and one green, and though the flesh on its face was almost non-existent, I could have sworn it smiled. "It'll get better," the beast told me. It put its bloody, bony hand on my shoulder, and I moved my light over, illuminating fingers in various stages of decay. "You'll grow up and you'll think this was just a dream." It dug its bony claws into my shoulder. "One day you'll be happy, you'll even have a family." It moved its hand off my shoulder and pulled the blanket up around me, tucking me in. "One day," it whispered, "you'll be afraid of the dark again." Then it leaned its bony face into mine and pursed the rotting flesh around its mouth into a kiss, planting a trace of gore on my cheek. It slithered away to the closet and looked back one last time as it closed the door. Then the beast said, "That's when I'll come for you." My arms shivered with goosebumps when Emma and Janie got there. I held my arms tight to my sides. "I didn't know it got this cold in the summer," I said as they joined me under the glow of the Walmart sign overhead. "Sorry it took so long. Emma's dad would not go to sleep," Janie said. Emma huffed. "If you would have hopped the fence with me, we would have made it sooner." They were always like that. It made me wonder why Emma invited Janie over to spend the night and not me. "Either way, it's freezing and I want to get to the mall as soon as possible," I said with a slight shiver in my voice. We laughed and told each other what horrible things were going to happen to us in the infamous mall for 15 minutes as we walked the sporadically lighted streets between the Walmart and the abandoned mall. They were tearing the thing down next week. This was our chance to finally explore it. As we got closer, we joked less, each of us trying to convince the others of our confidence. We made the last turn and the mall peered from behind the trees like it was waiting for us. "Fuck," I let slip. It looks worse than I thought. The cold was starting to hurt. Don't back out so early, Liz, Janie said. This isn't going to be like Halloween. Wasn't that you who backed out? Emma asked with a laugh. Janie rolled her eyes as we made our way through the empty parking lot. The mall felt hollow as we approached, as if we were not careful it would pull us down like a whirlpool. We were silent by the time we got to the broken glass door of the Macy's. Everyone knew how to get into the mall. It was a common hangout spot for the rougher kids. Smoking, drinking, everything that I was not into. We stood around the opening. I could hear the wind pulling us in. We only have 5 hours until sunrise. Let's get going, I said, projecting a fearless attitude I did not have. After you, Janie said. I crouched through the open pane and I am in. It reeked of piss and weed. The lights from the parking lot were blocked out to near total darkness by plywood. The town tried to keep people out. They did not try hard enough. It took a moment before my eyes fully adjusted to the darkness. By the time I could make out empty racks, empty beer cans, and layers of grime, Emma and Janie were standing inside with me. Being in here made it feel less ominous, less terrifying. It almost took the fun out of it. A piercing wail rang out through the mall, sharp and fantastic like a dying animal. It echoed. It was distant. Emma grabbed my hand and stepped back towards the door. Janie looked at us, trying to judge our reaction before showing hers. I squeezed Emma's hand, comforting her as much as myself. Do you think that was an animal? Janie asked, as if it was not the slightest bit unsettling. I don't think we should stay. We already did more than we did last time. Let's go and call it a win, Emma said, pulling my arm enough to cause me to step backwards. I think it was probably a raccoon or something, I said for Emma as much as myself. We won't have the chance to do this again. I think we should at least get inside the concourse first. I regretted saying it as soon as my lips stopped moving. This was wrong, and we all knew it. We were playing off each other, though. It was inevitable. We went deeper into the store. Mannequins watched us walk in a tight line toward the concourse. Their featureless faces felt alive in the shadows. My breath quickened, the darkness ever more imposing. By the time we got to the concourse, we knew we were too far to turn back. The silver moonlight illuminated the endless main hall. Empty storefronts all had security cages pulled down. It was like a zoo or a prison. Trash filled the corners and stains covered the walls. Whatever that place was like in its day was completely absent then. We were all taking the desolation in silence. It felt like the shadows began to shift. Breathless, constant wailing pierced the silence. It reverberated around us. It was coming from every direction. Emma screamed. I grasped her hand. Janie started back towards the Macy's. We followed, running as fast as we could. The wailing shifted, gurgling and strained as it grew louder. It wormed into my mind, pulling me. It was getting closer, and it was not a raccoon. We sprinted back through the store. The mannequins were closer, their eyeless faces turned towards us. My legs were burning, my breathing strained, but the cries pushed me forward. It was everywhere inside my head. Dust fell through the beam of light coming from the hole in the door. We were so close. The wailing vibrated through my teeth, burrowed into my skull. Emma's hand was tight in mine. I held on like it was my lifeline. Her hand tore from mine so hard I almost fell. Emma, I gasped. Janie's figure slipped through the hole as I turned. Emma was gone, and it was there. Teeth slick with blood and saliva glistened in the dark. Red eyes burned into mine. Impossible shapes writhed in the darkness, shifting like smoke. I wanted to help her. Everything in me wanted to pull her back from whatever it was. But my body didn't listen. It only cared about my survival. I only cared about my survival. I ran, scurrying out of the hole like a rat. The wailing was dripping and full. I can't think about it. I just ran. The freezing air burned my lungs. The mall loomed behind us, alive in the darkness, its shadows reaching out hungry for more. It took Emma, and it wants more. So I figured I should start out by saying that I've never written any of my stories down before now, and I have quite a few. I'm in the Army, can't say which base specifically for obvious reasons, but I can say that my travels have brought me everywhere from Germany to Missouri. The Army loves abbreviations, so I'll explain what each one means when I use an acronym. My first story takes place in Missouri, and it still leaves me full of questions even now. I was on the last FTX, field training exercise of O-suit, one station unit training, and we dug our foxholes immediately after establishing our patrol base, for lack of a better term, our campsite. This particular FTX was 5 days long for reference. We were doing stand 2, everyone on lookout for the last 30 minutes of daylight, at the end of our first day. I was in my foxhole and I heard movement about 20 yards out from my position, so I whispered to the guy next to me. I'll be referring to him as D for this story. ID, I'm hearing something a little ways out to our 2. 2 being the direction, think of a clock. Yeah, I hear it. Might be Senior M, our platoon senior drill sergeant. Just get ready for shit to kick off. Bet, is your 249 racked? The 249 is the saw. I already knew the answer to my question, but I still felt the need to ask, just to fill the air with the familiar sound of my own voice. Yep, keep listening and see if you can find him. So I laid there motionless, trying to find the man that had made our last 19 weeks pure hell. Now I grew up in West Virginia, hunting and spending my first 18 years in the woods. But I, for the life of me, could not find the source of the snapping twigs and rustling leaves. The sound seemed to be moving closer to us and getting more aggressive, almost violent. Then it stopped. All at once there was just silence, no birds or frogs. I mean absolute silence, which was very odd. Then it started again, but it sounded like multiple people running through the woods, almost sprinting at us. D let off a burst with the 249 and called out contact. But as soon as the shots rang out, it was silent again. At that moment, Senior M came running up behind us and started cursing at us for having an ND, negligent discharge. D and myself were confused but didn't question him. We learned very early that you never questioned any of the cadre. After explaining our situation to Senior M, he shook his head and walked out in front of our position and looked around with his flashlight and couldn't find anything. Later that night, I kept hearing scratching and grinding noises from the direction of the rustling from earlier. These noises would last for about 3 minutes, and then it would go back to that eerie silence, only for the noises to start back up about half an hour later. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, after a lovely breakfast of MREs, we had time to further fortify our fighting positions. I took the opportunity to look where the rustling had come from the evening prior. I found something that still weirds me out today. In a clearing not even 25 yards in front of our foxholes was another foxhole facing ours. To make it even worse, there was a fresh deer carcass laying in it. It looked like the antlers had been brutally ripped off and its throat crudely slashed open. After seeing this, we told our cadre, but when we led them back to where I had found the deer, the hole had been filled in a small mound of dirt. Myself and D were persistent on what we had seen, but the cadre wrote it off as us trying to go back to the comfort of our beds back in our bay. Everything was calm the next 3 nights until the final night after we did our culminating event, which consisted of our platoon attacking a small town, which was occupied by the cadre and the other 2 platoons. After our culminating event, we fired off the remainder of our blanks and pulled security on the patrol base, similar to Stand 2 but in the early afternoon, and we only had 50% of our people in their fighting positions. I was laying in my foxhole on my back with my rifle propped up against the dirt mound by my head. D was talking about his girlfriend back in NYC, and then he go really quiet. I asked why he stopped talking, to which he gave no response. Then looked over the dirt mound in the direction of the clearing and saw him. It was roughly 17:30, right before we were supposed to start Stand 2 that evening. In the twisted shadows cast by the trees, standing in the middle of the clearing was a man with no head. He was wearing a very old U.S. Army uniform. He was carrying his helmet in one hand and a K-bar knife in the other. He was watching us. I sat there unable to move. Then he turned and ran deeper into the woods at a full sprint. After the longest 5 minutes of my life, I finally looked over at D, who was still laying with his 249 pointed towards the clearing. I finally broke the silence. Did you see that shit? Yep. After asking a couple more questions about how long he'd been there, we decided we couldn't tell the cadre about it. They'd think we were crazy and send us to Camp Charlie, Psyche Ward, and have us separated from the Army. So that's what we did. We didn't tell anyone until I got to my first real assignment in Germany. I had heard some of my friends telling stories about creepy shit they've seen. Then I told the story for the first time. No one even batted an eye at it. They just offered similar stories from their FTX when they were in O-suit. I haven't talked to D since we graduated, but it does provide some comfort that I'm not crazy. The first note showed up on my car windshield 3 months ago. It was just a piece of plain white paper, folded neatly under the wiper. At first I thought it was just some stupid flyer, but when I unfolded it, there was only one line written in blocky, uneven handwriting. "I saw you smile today." I looked around the parking lot, but it was empty. My stomach churned as I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. The second note came 2 weeks later. This time it was taped to my front door. "Blue looks good on you." I'd worn a blue sweater that day. I told myself it was just some weird prank, but my hands were shaking as I locked every door and window in the house that night. The notes kept coming, always short, always unnervingly specific. "You hum when you cook." "I love the way you tuck your hair behind your ear." "You forgot to lock the back door last night." That one made me vomit. I called the police, but they didn't take me seriously. "It's probably just a neighbor," the officer said. "Let us know if it escalates." If it escalates. The next week, my dog Roscoe disappeared. I searched the neighborhood for hours, calling his name until my throat was raw. Roscoe wasn't the type of dog to run away. He barely liked going on walks. The next morning, though, I found another note on my doorstep. Roscoe was in the way. I broke down. I didn't leave the house for days, calling out of work and ignoring texts from friends. I wanted to pack up and leave, but I had nowhere to go. That's when the photos started. The first one was tucked into my mailbox. It was a picture of me, taken through my living room window while I watched TV. My face was illuminated by the screen, my expression relaxed, oblivious. The next photo was worse. It was of me sleeping. I could see myself curled up on my side, the blankets pulled halfway up my body. The angle was too close, too intimate. Whoever took it hadn't taken it from a distance using a telephoto lens. They'd been inside my room. I called the police again, but they still didn't help. "We don't have enough evidence," they said. "It's probably some kids playing a prank." A prank. 2 nights ago, I heard footsteps in the hall. I locked my bedroom door and shoved a chair under the handle, clutching my phone and a kitchen knife. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and for hours I listened to the sound of someone breathing. It was slow, steady, and deliberate. Eventually, it faded. In the morning, I found scratched on the outside of the door. Deep, jagged marks as if someone had been dragging a blade across the wood. Last night, I woke up to find a new note on my pillow. "I watch you sleep." I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just sat there, frozen, my skin crawling as I stared at the words. This morning, I checked my phone. There were 47 new photos in my gallery. They were all of me, taken at different times, walking to my car, brushing my hair, sleeping. And in every photo, I wasn't alone. He was there in the background. A shadow just barely visible, a shape hiding in plain sight. I'm writing this now because I don't think I'll have another chance. He's here, somewhere in the house. I can hear the faint creak of floorboards, the soft rustle of fabric. The last note is sitting on my desk. "You should have smiled more." "Do you still need a rug for your home? Good condition and the price is negotiable. Call me anytime." That was the first thing I read that morning while still in bed, as I picked up my phone to turn off the alarm. The sender's number wasn't saved in any of my contacts. It was sent at 4 a.m. I assumed I accidentally ended up on some spam list and ignored it, as the apartment I had been living in for the last month was already fully furnished. It was annoying, but I had to get ready for work, and those things tend to happen. My workplace was just a short metro trip from the apartment. I lived alone, although my boyfriend Terry was planning to move in with me in a few weeks. My supervisor was waiting for me at the reception area. Unfortunately, for the first day since I got the job, the metro was late. I worked at a consulting firm, and the only other time she had greeted me in the 2 months I worked there was on my first day. Not arriving on time was already not a good impression. "Good morning, Monica. I'm afraid to inform you that the meeting we discussed has been scheduled for 11 o'clock. I'll need your report by then." My gut was twisted by anxiety. "My report is almost finished. I'll have it on your desk by 11, I said, trying to keep a natural expression. "That's great. See you later." The report wasn't exactly almost finished, so realized I couldn't waste any time. I went straight to my cubicle. There was a pink post-it on the monitor. "I still need your answer for tonight." Damn, I knew I forgot something. My friend Katie asked if we could have a double date at my place since I live alone. Terry had a night shift. He didn't reply until this morning. She probably put the post-it before I arrived this morning, as I forgot to reply to her last night. I quickly texted her that we would be there, then put my phone in flight mode to better focus on the report. It wasn't easy, but I managed to finish the report just in time. Lunchtime had already started by the time the meeting was over, so I went to the cafeteria. Katie was already eating. "Hey." I sat at her table. "Hey, are you still too busy to answer your phone?" she said with a smug expression. "Sorry, I forgot to reply, but today I have been really busy. I got late and a rescheduling happened, which nobody told me about until this morning." "Damn, I'm sorry that you had it rough. So, are you and Terrence not coming tonight?" "We'll be coming. Didn't you see my text?" I looked at her, confused. "What text?" "I didn't receive anything." I pulled out my phone. It was still in flight mode. "I was sure I texted you earlier this morning. Let me check." I got a notification about an unread message. The rug salesman had sent the same message again. "Oh, you're right. I accidentally replied to someone else." I kept looking at my phone as I didn't believe it. Given the hurry, I absent-mindedly sent the message to the top contact, which would have been Katie if the unknown number never texted me. I quickly replied that I mistakenly texted him and wasn't interested in any rug, then blocked the contact. Katie laughed. "Monica, I told you that you focus too much on work. You should relax more," she said with her mocking smile in full display. "But don't worry, drinks are on me tonight." "Sure." I let out a small laugh. "Just make sure to not throw up in my living room. I remember the last party. We'll be fine. Alex is a good guy. He'll let stop me in time. I hope so, at least." The rest of the day was also stressful. Due to the rescheduling, I had way more work piled up than usual. Terry would meet at home before dinner to help me get the place ready. I had a shower, got changed, and then I browsed social media on my phone waiting for Terry. I noticed I had yet another unread message. It was another message about the rug, the same as the previous ones, but from a different number. This was getting annoying. I just blocked contact without replying. Terry arrived not long after, bringing the cake. I greeted him with a kiss, and then we started cleaning up. We were talking about our respective workdays when my phone buzzed. I expected Katie to tell me she was running late. "For fuck's sake," I exclaimed, slamming my hand on the table. It was another spam message about the rug. "What's wrong, honey?" asked Terry, worried about the sudden change in my expression. "Sorry, it's been a long day. It seems my number ended up in some spam marketing list, so I've been getting texts all day. It's so annoying." "Have you blocked them?" "Yes, twice. Those assholes don't seem to know when to stop. Maybe I should call the police." "For what? A spam message? Don't bother. Maybe you should just call them and tell them to fuck off." "Are you serious?" "Yeah, my sister worked at a call center. You know those about phone plans. She said her contract dictated to try again with the same client until they accepted or got an explicit refusal. I wasn't really in the mood to argue and just wanted to stop it." "All right, but you do it." I handed the phone to Terry. "I've had enough for today." He called the number. After a couple of rings, the unknown seller picked up. "Hello?" Terry's voice was followed by a complete silence. We could only hear faint breathing coming from the other side of the phone. "Listen, I'm not interested in any rug. I don't want anything. Stop texting this number." More silence followed. "Hello, are you there? Just stop bothering me." Another 10 seconds of silence later, the other number had hung up. "It's probably an automated calling service or something like that. I doubt a real person was even on the other hand." Tried to explain to Terry while I was bringing the tablecloth. "You're right. Hopefully they got the message." I had calmed down and just wanted to look forward to the night. Around 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Katie and her boyfriend Alex had arrived. She greeted me by handing me a bottle of wine while Alex followed her with the pizzas. We were about to eat when the doorbell rang again. I looked at Katie, puzzled. "Did you invite someone else? Number, I thought it was just the four of us tonight, right?" She was looking just as puzzled as me. Alex, as he was sitting closest to the door, went to open the door as I got up from the table. "I think it's your order, Monica. Someone must have left it here." He had picked up a sealed cardboard box as he closed the door. "I wasn't expecting any package. They probably got the wrong address." "But it's your apartment number. This is number 14, isn't it?" Alex put the package on the floor. It was a plain cardboard package. The address was correct. "I'm sure I did not order anything recently. Besides, isn't it too late for deliveries? Christmas was in more than a month and nowhere near closer to my birthday." Terry also isn't the kind of guy to randomly make gifts. Katie pat me on the back. Well, maybe you have a secret Santa, although a bit early. Let's see what's inside. As I opened the box, my heart skipped a beat. A blue, cheap-looking rug rolled up with a red outline inside. What the fuck? This can't be real. I took a step back and looked at Terry just to confirm that I wasn't hallucinating. He was also astounded. It's just a rug, what's the big deal? Asked Katie, trying to understand my reaction. Terry briefly summed up the story while I couldn't avoid to look at the package. Maybe there was an error and the automated system sent an order for you instead of... The doorbell rang. Katie still looked confused. Maybe they realized the mistake and came to take the rug back. Terry went to open the door. He looked around and then went back inside. There was nobody. Are there some kids pulling pranks in this building? I don't know, but whatever. Why don't we just get back to the pizzas? We were about to start eating when we heard a couple of knocks, but they weren't from the door. Everybody froze. Terry spoke first after what felt like an eternity. It came from the balcony? We were on the 3rd floor. We couldn't see the balcony from the living room, as it could only be accessed from my bedroom. I'm calling the police. This isn't funny anymore. I picked up my phone. I noticed I had gotten another message. Order accepted. From yet another unknown number. I tried not to think about it and dialed 911, my fingers trembling. We heard the doorbell again. We looked at the door as the doorbell kept ringing nonstop. What do you want from us? Fuck off, shouted Terry while the knock on the balcony had resumed. 911, what's your emergency? A relief hit me as the operator picked up the phone. Someone is trying to get inside my apartment. We don't know who they are. Please help us. What's the address of the The call was cut short as the lights went out. Everything was pitch black aside from the light from my phone, which had lost reception. Something shifted in the dark. Stay away from the door. Terry and Alex had moved in front of me and Katie, grabbing kitchen knives from the table. Not long after, Katie's phone illuminated the dark room. The front door was still closed, as well as the door to my bedroom that faced the balcony. The cardboard box, however, had been moved. The rug had been laid out on the floor and was no longer rolled up. What the fuck? There is someone else in there. Monica, call 911. I hit the recall button, my fingers still trembling. The reception, it's still gone. I could feel my heartbeat shooting up. Try with mine. Terry handed me his phone. I tried calling again and again while we stood in the darkness. It's not working either. Katie, try with your phone, please. All right. Katie's pointed her phone downwards as the darkness engulfed us. We couldn't hear anything else but ourselves as the doorbell and the banging noises from the balcony seemed to have stopped. I've got no reception either. Alex, try it as well. Alex also pulled out his phone. Shit, same for my phone. What do we do? Should we try making a run for it? We have to try. Terry, what do you think? We could only hear his breathing as Terry didn't reply. Terry? I asked, grabbing his arm, except that was not Terry. What I just touched felt rough, like sandpaper or rusty metal. I screamed, dropping my phone. Then the lights came back. I felt reassured when I didn't see any stranger in the room and could still see Alex and Katie's faces. As our eyes adjusted to the sudden lights, the terror returned, magnified. Blood had been splattered everywhere on the floor, with a trail leading to the door to my bedroom now ajar. Katie and Alex also screamed. Terry was missing. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, Monica, we have to get out of here. I ignored her and was about to go to the bedroom, determined to look for Terry. Now let's go. Alex grabbed my arm and pulled me to the front door, still closed. I stumbled on the cardboard box while looking at the bedroom door. As I looked down, my eyes filled with tears. Inside the box was a severed arm, drenched in blood. A piece of a shirt was still attached to the arm, and it looked exactly like what Terry was wearing. I rushed outside the apartment, screaming. The neighbors had already called 911 due to the noise. The police questioned us and searched the whole building with no results. When they were done, it was late at night and I couldn't return to the apartment. I did not want to return after what happened, and Katie asked me to spend the night at her place. I was heartbroken and couldn't stop crying. Alex and Katie tried to comfort me, and I could feel they were also shaken. I told them they could go to bed, wishing good night. It's no surprise that I couldn't sleep that night. I tried to close my eyes, but it reminded me too much of the darkness from earlier. I tried to watch TV to not think about it, but I couldn't forget. I must not forget. So I started writing this down, hoping to finally fall asleep. I had been asleep for a couple of hours at most when I was woken up by a notification sound. After checking, it didn't come from mine. I noticed Katie had left her phone on the couch after going to sleep. I was about to move it out of the way when I gasped. I couldn't help but read the received message. Do you still need a rug for your home? Good condition and the price is negotiable. Call me anytime. My mom would tell me she felt an obligation to Aunt Lily because they were close growing up. Lily had a difficult time with money and was the sole caretaker for a son from her divorce. Isaac was 23 and couldn't live on his own. After Lily stopped taking him to his appointments, he talked less and put on weight. I remember the foot baths Lily would set up for him while he watched TV. He'd soak there for hours, making the whole living room smell like Epsom salt and skin. I spent a lot of time at Aunt Lily's house. Isaac had a habit of collecting garbage in various containers. His largest repository was of empty tissue boxes, taking up nearly 3 whole plastic tubs near the fridge. If you touched them, he would refuse to move for several hours. The loft was the only place that Isaac wouldn't stash things. It was a simple room with a guest mattress. My mom let me play Wii up there while she and Lily talked. Our visits started becoming more frequent. Eventually, we started going every Saturday. Lily came up to the loft once. She sat very close to me on the bed. She started telling me about her medicine. She pressed a small brown glass bottle into my hand. There was a clear liquid inside, which she said to drink a capful of every day. I showed it to my mom when we got home. Worry flashed on her face, and she told me Aunt Lily had different ideas about medicine that weren't necessarily true. She said that even if Lily talked like she knew what was right, that only doctors who'd been to medical school had the knowledge to diagnose and prescribe remedies properly. Taking things that Lily gave me could be dangerous. I don't know what she did with the bottle. Our visits kept up for 2 more years, and I graduated middle school. My mom got me a few Pokemon booster packs as congratulations. One of them contained a shiny Charizard, which became my most prized possession. I put it in a plastic sleeve and would take it with me places just so I could look at it. Around this time, Isaac's complexion started to turn a shade of gray. The smell of whatever Lily rubbed on him stopped wearing off. When he would look at me as I was going upstairs, I'd sometimes catch an expression close to worry on his face. It deeply concerned me, but it didn't seem like my mom or Lily noticed. We didn't talk about Isaac much. I kept it to myself. I brought Charizard with me on my last visit to Lily's. I was admiring it in the loft, trying to ignore the rumbling in my stomach. Aunt Lily only had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which I had grown tired of months ago. Eventually, my hunger tore my eyes away from the card regardless. I left it on the bed as I went downstairs. It took me a while to realize that Lily was out of peanut butter. Navigating Isaac's various kitchen collections slowed my search. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs up to the loft as I tentatively opened another cupboard. A minute or 2 later, as I slathered 2 slices of white bread with a generous helping of grape jelly, I heard my mom call up to me. Before I could respond, she started to yell my name a second time. She stopped short, the words catching in her throat. Her footsteps raced down the stairs. She grabbed me by the arm and yanked me away from my sandwich fixings. I tried to ask her what was going on, but the look on her face silenced me immediately. I'd never seen her eyes so wide. As we raced out the door, she mumbled a lie about a work project to Aunt Lily, which only confused me more. In the commotion, I didn't get a chance to go get Charizard. I wanted to ask my mom about what happened on the drive home, make her turn around so I could go get my card, but her pursed lips and fixed stare intimidated me. In the end, I said nothing. After that day, whenever Aunt Lily would call, my mom would make an excuse as to why we couldn't go over. It took about a week for Lily to stop reaching out. Whenever I tried to bring up her or Isaac, my mom's face would grow dark and her responses would get curt. I learned to stop prying. 2 months later, Isaac died. They said it was a heart attack. At the funeral, Aunt Lily kept opening and closing her mouth. Her teeth hitting each other made this awful guttural noise. My mom didn't look at her. Lily went to stay with friends on the East Coast. It was supposed to be temporary, but I never saw her again. A friend offered me $60 for my shiny Charizard recently. It was the first time I'd thought about it since my last visit to Aunt Lily's. I knew my mom kept a spare key. Part of me was screaming to not go, but I was saving up for an Xbox and I wanted that money. I waited for my mom to leave for work that weekend. As soon as I was alone, I took the key from its dresser drawer and got on my bike. The house stood silent and unchanged since I had last been there. On the ride over, a terrible weight settled in my stomach. I had pushed it down, but it surged stronger than before when I tried the front door handle and found it unlocked. Isaac's garbage was still neatly piled in the living room. Something dripped from the bottom of the fridge door into a murky puddle on the linoleum. An oppressive feeling washed over me. I felt watched, judged. I made my way to the stairs. With the electricity off, the light of the overcast afternoon outside was all there was to see by. It colored the walls and carpets grayscale. No windows were close enough to the stairs to ward the darkness that had settled in their higher reaches. Phone flashlight in hand, I began my ascent. I paused before the last 5 steps to the loft. The feeling in my stomach grew heavier. I hadn't gone high enough to see into the room. The window was the only thing visible to me. Dust hung in the air. It took a surprising amount of courage to push myself forward. I stopped on the second to last step. The mattress was covered with a wide, sickly yellow stain. I didn't see my Charizard where I'd left it. My heart started pounding in my ears. As soon as I stopped holding my breath, I noticed the smell. It was thick and penetrating, invading my nostrils, making my eyes water. I'd never experienced anything like it before. Chlorine in a stagnant pool, sweat, copper. There was a plain paper grocery bag in the corner. Top folded down, its sides bulged, overfull. Another nearly identical bag sat next to it, but this one was still open. The stench emanated from them. I could almost see it in the air. Isaac had collected something in this room. I biked home so fast that I could taste blood in my teeth. I couldn't explain to my mom why I was crying when she got back. Now, whenever I think about my time in that loft, the smell comes back to me. The bags I always just looked over burn into my memory. How do I forget them? How do I stop feeling sick? The year was 1997, and me and my best friend from college, we'll just call him K. It's based off an old chemistry joke about potassium. We became friends because of it. We're working on a project for some digital street mapping company that popped up along with a lot of other ambitious computer app companies. It died along with them too. But it's the project we worked on that really matters. You see, me and Kay had already completed the entirety of the city we lived in at the time for the company when it went over. We ended up keeping all of the files as the company definitely didn't need them anymore. I can't confirm it, but I heard the CEO had committed suicide shortly after his company went under. Poor guy. That project ended up sitting in storage for quite a while. After all, we had no use for a detailed recreation of an entire city, especially one without any interior details. It wasn't until 2002 we even had a thought about it. In fact, I still remember the moment Kay reminded me of it. We were in the lab working on a project for Yahoo Mail. We had to fix some inbox glitch or something. Kay looked over at me after a moment of silence and said, "Me, do you remember what we did with that project for that map company?" The moment he said that, I reeled from the memory of programming that just for it to shut down halfway through the planned prototype's build phase. It proved useful after all this time, though. Me and Kay had been dipping in game development for a few companies at this time, since we made most of our money from commissions, and video games made up a lot of the market now. Once we booted up the models, we realized that we already had most of what we needed for a pretty solid open-world game. The size of the map was huge. I mean, it was an entire city span. All we really needed to do was to make interiors for buildings we wanted used, then to make some enemies and a playable character. We made a basic player script and decided to really focus on interiors and AI for the enemies. Kay was better at the modeling stuff, and I did better with the programming. So we decided to split the work in the most efficient way we could. I made the AI, and he did the world map. It wasn't until 2005, when the company shut down, that we really put our project into high gear. Since the need for on-demand commission programmers wasn't very high anymore, the company ran out of money, so me and Kay were out of a job. The company had to sell everything, so me and Kay ended up buying all of our gear from the company for a pretty good price. We set up a new computer lab in a little single-bed apartment and split the rent. We both got new jobs and came into the lab at different times, so we didn't really get to see each other there much. One thing we did a lot was we left sticky notes on the monitors. With bugs, the one needed fixed while the other was in. Cell phones were bulky then, and neither of us had one. I came into the lab one day and I noticed a sticky note on the monitor. It simply read, "Please fix the bug that makes it so enemies can change the environment. It's screwing with my landscape." It was definitely a little weird, but I figured it was an issue with the vertices of the enemies getting caught with the ones in objects or something. It was an issue that arose with making my own engine, one I had thought that I'd fixed. When I went into the code, though, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I tried to recreate what I thought he was talking about when I saw it. The NPCs weren't clipping or fusing with the environment, or at least I didn't think that was the issue. They were moving stuff around somehow. Chairs, couches, TVs, cars, trash bins, whatever movable objects there were in the game, they'd been pushed around the map. I programmed the AI to ignore pushable objects, and it seemed to be working finally. It had already been hours, and it was super late, so I called it a day and forgot to turn off the computer. I had worked back-to-back at the office job I worked at the time, so I couldn't go into the lab for a few days. When I was finally able to come in, though, I found a few sticky notes sitting on the monitors. They were all pretty similar, with an example being bug with district number 3, street 12, lamppost number 7 model inverts upon night cycle start. However, I also noticed a note that read the following: "Come. And dude, actually fix the enemy's interaction with the world map, please. It's gotten worse. And I don't want to work on the world map much more until it's fixed. The game's somehow saving the changes, and I have to manually fix it in the editor and export a new build every time. It's making it frustrating to work on." This got me pretty worried. How could the enemies be making permanent changes to the project? That shouldn't be possible outside of the editor, and the project is only run in a debug window. There shouldn't be any connection. No matter how far I scrolled into the code, I couldn't find anything with any remote connection to this bug. By this point, the bug was more like a virus because I couldn't fix it or figure out where the problem was originating from. I knew it was either a problem with the world map or the enemy's AI. I looked through the changes he was writing about, and it was a mess. I could tell before I ran it that Kay had fixed most of whatever changes were made other than slight graphical glitches here and there with the world map. The game had pretty much been repaired, but the moment I ran the program, it all jumped into chaos. The map was rapidly changing. Buildings were moving, being destroyed, and built? The map went from a city to a massive cluster of meshes in about 2 minutes. I was honestly too awestruck to shut down the program or really do anything. The landscape looked desolate with no NPCs or proper buildings standing anymore. All there was now was an enormous collaboration of warped walls and broken objects. It was like a massive corrupted city inside of a broken tower. After everything settled, I shut it all down and went home. I didn't go back to the lab for at least 2 weeks. I didn't go back until I realized I couldn't get a hold of Kay, and no one else knew where he was. When I finally went back, I found Kay, sitting in the same office chair he sat in when we first started in that lab together all of those years ago. He sat there with his wrist slit, and he was dead. I saw something out of the corner of my eye in the computer screen, a face. I saw it staring at me for a brief moment before the computer went dark, and no, I don't mean a picture of someone looking in my general direction or something. I mean a face, in the game me and Kay have been working on for years, staring at me. I didn't get a good look at it, but it was disgusting. It looked like the enemy model I designed with Kay, mixed with his face and bleeding out of every pore. I threw up. I couldn't handle it. The blurry image of that thing etched into my brain, while I was forced by my own eyes to stare at my best friend's body. After what felt like years of waiting, I finally called the cops. They got a statement from me. I left out the part about the computer for probably good reason, and after some time I could finally go back into the apartment. Not that I wanted to. Kay's funeral was small. He didn't have family, and I was his only friend. It was held on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. The day was cloudy, the sun was nowhere to be seen. After the funeral, I went back to the lab. I knew I couldn't leave that computer or any of those files intact. I had to do something. I'm writing this to you now as I wait for the fire to consume me. Don't come looking for this lab, and don't try to recover anything from it. The devil lives inside this computer, and I programmed him.